One last short intro and we will begin the show. The late night debate watch and review. Bart Ehrman versus Dr. Robert Price. Starting after one more intro. Share the links, give it a like, and get ready. Grab your popcorn. And we're mullet maxing. And by the way, we're mullet maxing. Two shows today. Make it 3 shows. I had the Zoom call before as well. We're doing a 3 a day. Didn't hit the goal this morning, so we're back. Mrs. No More News says, "Are you streaming tonight?" I said, "You bet your ass I am." Forever. What else am I gonna do? Hang out with my internet friends and watch some based in red pill dope shit. Alter ego late night show? Don't mind if I do. Okay, thank you for enjoying the intro. Hope that was very entertaining for all of you. What's up, guys? Adam Green here, No More News, ready for a late night jam sesh. How am I coming in here? Been wanting to do this one for a long time. Bart Ehrman and Dr. Robert Price debated, did Jesus exist 9 years ago? It's got 1.5 million views, and from what I remember, I watched this years ago, 12,000 likes. From what I remember, Robert Price dropped the ball. He fumbled and he did not do good at all. He's not cut out for debating, apparently. So that's what I remember. We will see. Gonna refresh my memory and all this stuff. So might as well watch it with you guys. Look at this too, Bart Ehrman and Wes Huff have been beefing. The two top apologists, the old guard and the new guard, the up-and-comer and the OG, are beefing. Bart Ehrman versus Wes Huff. I gotta take Ehrman, to be honest, if I had to choose, to be honest. But before we do this is a long one, we might not get to all of it. Before we do this, when I was searching on YouTube for their debate, this Myth Vision video came up. Derek looks like it's 10 years ago. When did this come out? 7 months ago. He reposts old stuff though. But so I go to this, I'm like, what are they reviewing the debate? And then I skip to it and he's instantly talking about Midrash. So I want to see that too. So we're gonna watch this to start. Let me make sure you guys can hear this. I'll get the power chat turned on so I can hear what you guys have to say. Can you guys hear this?
As evidence, it seems, to some degree, like he thinks there's something there. Whereas like a lot of people I talk to, they're like, yeah, scratch the Gospels out. Let's go to Paul. Let's figure out who the Jesus was with Paul. That's what I hear a lot of people do. You're like,
Holy
you
shit.
the fable, the Superman. What are you left with? Clark Kent. And then you started giving examples. You're like, okay, well, let's see where the historical significance of this story is. There were swine, and they were running down a hill, and they saw dogs or something, and they scattered and ran into the sea and drowned. And you're like, oh. And what was funny about these quotes is nothing in them seemed like, it was like, why would you remember that? Like you make the point that, okay, if all the mythology stuff isn't true, why are you writing if these insignificant portions are real history and the mythology's wiped away, why would they even write it? So what are some things you felt on top of what you just discussed here in the debate that he didn't address that you think you had some strong reasons and strong points that you just think even the audience may not have caught, but he especially didn't catch?
Yeah, the thing you just mentioned, the midrashic rewrites of these stories, let's see, Bart says in Did Jesus Exist that the coloring of the stories, the local color and the biblical style and so forth, it may be secondary. Okay, they may have embellished the stories, but there's a historical nucleus. Well, what is it? And I took about 7 different miracle stories, and okay, let's subtract the miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. Suppose everybody was hungry and they had enough food to feed everybody. Is that going to make it into the Gospels with no miracle when it exactly corresponds to Elisha feeding a bunch of people with a small amount of food? I mean, if that's not just coloring, that's the central event of the story. And so if you get rid of that, you've got no story. And the same with several other ones. Take away the supposed Old Testament coloring of it, you got nothing. He said, oh, well, I didn't mean individual stories. I meant the whole general story. Though in his book, he quite clearly says, yes, individual stories. So I think he didn't really address that substantially. Another one was that I think just got ignored, if I'm remembering.
Okay, this is a cope sesh, apparently. As soon as I skipped, he mentioned Midrash. He didn't get too deep into it there. Basically just said it was that. So here's Bart's opening statement. And how many years ago was this again? It's 9 years ago. And he hasn't debated Jesus mythicism again since. It's been 9 years. Refuses to ever debate Richard Carrier. Price is the only mythicist debate I'm aware that he's ever done. And people are going, even Bart Ehrman says. He won't even debate. He won't even engage all the top mythicist arguments. And Price is a old dude and not really a good debater. So let's see. Let's see it.
Yeah, so now we know. So I just do want you to know that whatever happens tonight, the debate's been rigged.
That's a Trump joke.
Well, okay. So this is obviously an important issue for you, and it should be an important issue for everybody. I mean, if Jesus didn't exist, that would be a big deal.
Yes, it would.
2 billion people in the world today who worship Jesus. Christianity completely changed.
And 2.4 billion that worship Jesus as a Messiah don't worship him, but they believe he's a prophet and a Messiah, and he's going to return in Islam. Half the world believes in the Jesus lie. He didn't exist. If Bart Ehrman just said, you know what, actually, Carrier's right, he didn't exist, and then all the other scholars started saying that, that would be the magnitude of Christianity would be in a crisis. And the Christian apologists wouldn't be able to do the, even Bart Ehrman says. It would be huge. Think of the Jesus industry. The Jesus industry, the Jesus industrial complex, all the vested interests of big institutions and organizations, the vested interest in keeping the Jesus lie afloat and shutting down any inquiry into Jesus mythicism with the appeal to Bart Ehrman and the appeal to consensus that they always do. Jesus industrial complex, the trillion-dollar industry, poof, up in smoke once if secular scholars that were being honest took over biblical studies, which has always been dominated by Christians, of course.
Western civilization. There has been nothing like Christianity that has affected such change in the history of the West. Nothing. This is actually the topic of the book that I'm working on now, is how Christianity took over the Roman Empire.
1.5.
Realize if Christianity had not become the religion of the West, we simply would not
I listened to that book of his, how it took over the Roman Empire. A lot of banger quotes about how Christianity conquered the pagan gods, and that was the point.
the cultural history we've had, whether you're thinking in terms of art or literature,
Big Yeshua.
or architecture. Our lives would be
The Jesus Industrial Complex, otherwise known as Big Yeshua. The Jesus industry.
Jesus never lived. This is a religion based on a myth.
A lie.
I'm not a believer in Jesus, but I do believe in history, and I believe it's important to know what actually happened in the past, even if we would prefer that something else had happened. Let me give you a brief synopsis.
You believe in history, and he likes to frame himself as a historian on the Jesus historical question, but he was actually educated at Christian schools in theology. Not necessarily like a historian, a non-biased secular historian education.
Tonight, my brief synopsis is this. Whatever else you want to say about Jesus of Nazareth, I think you can say that he certainly existed. In my talk, I'm going to be mounting the positive arguments for that, some of the positive arguments, and we have only 30 minutes. If you've read Bob's work, you know he could go for 30 days without repeating himself. So we only have 30 minutes. So I'm going to give you some of the stronger arguments that Jesus certainly existed. I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on the arguments on the other side. I'm not going to be spending time refuting mythicist arguments. For one thing, in this debate, you haven't heard any yet, so I'm not going to be refuting them. But I did want to start out just by saying a couple of things, just to give you a sense for what I think is sometimes happens, which is that sometimes mythicists mount arguments that, for me at least, are not very convincing. And so I just want to give two of those before getting into the positive side. Again, not having a clue what Bob is going to say. First thing I want to say is the first argument that I find completely unconvincing, that some of you have heard and maybe have found convincing, is the idea that Jesus of Nazareth could not have existed because Nazareth did not exist. There was no Nazareth. I simply have never found this argument to be anywhere close to persuasive for two reasons.
I have seen people make that argument. Hold on. They make that argument in, I think it's, where is it? There's a chapter in Bart Ehrman in The Quest of the Historical Jesus of Nazareth. I think Frank Zindler wrote it about Nazareth not existing at the time of Jesus, and it being Nazarite or branch. Nazarite or branch. ASM. You guys want some ASM? How does this sound? Is that better? Is that better for you, Big Mama? Are you still watching, Big Mama? Anyway, though, that's not like the first argument of Jesus mythicism. It's not like Nazareth didn't exist. Although he makes a pretty compelling argument.
Have done.
You don't hear me saying that. Has the chat ever heard me on a show or in a debate say Nazareth, Jesus didn't exist because Nazareth didn't exist? Even bringing that up at the very off the bat is almost like a straw man, is what it feels like. Like, great, start with like the most fringe, uncommon argument.
Where ancient Nazareth was, and they've discovered that it was there. This is not a debated point among Palestinian archaeologists, several of which are good friends of mine. They don't debate whether Nazareth existed because they have dug it and they found it. They've uncovered a house there, they've uncovered a farm there, they've uncovered pottery there, they've uncovered coins there. The pottery and the coins date to the days of Jesus. Certainly, Nazareth did exist. It's been shown to exist. Hey guys, hey Mossad, if you're out there and you want to take me out, I got my road mic right here.
We should do a grok of me holding my road mic like this, and then have it blow up with grok. Charlie Kirk me. Yeah, Abraham Matrix. Isn't that straw man as F? Straw man as F. Starting with Nazareth.
Anyone who thinks otherwise simply doesn't know the archaeological record. I'm afraid it's that simple. The second reason for not being convinced by this, though...
His argument is, I have a friend who says it exists, and I don't think anybody disputes it did exist at some time, but that it was after the time of Jesus. And was it even a known place? Because he said, oh, they found a house there and a barn or something. It's like, okay, well, there could have been something there, but was it known as a place called Nazareth at that point? Because you see, one of the arguments is Josephus was like the general or something like that of Galilee. And he lists and writes all about all the places in Galilee, never mentions a Nazareth. And there's other reasons too, but
did not exist because he could not have been born in Nazareth. Is like saying Barack Obama doesn't exist because he couldn't have been born in America. What everyone thinks about the birther issue, and judging from your show of hands, I think most of you don't subscribe to it, it's got nothing to do with whether Barack Obama actually exists or not.
Dude, what a stupid analogy. Jesus is called the Nazarite, meaning the branch. That's the netzer, the Hebrew word for it. That's what they link it to it from, I think, Isaiah 11 or 9. Can't remember right now, probably 11, Isaiah 11. And so that's why they say, and in the original Greek of the first time he's called Jesus of Nazareth, it's worded in a way where it sounds like it's not talking about a place. And he just goes, well, I know an archaeologist that said that there was a Nazareth, and you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, great debunk. He doesn't even address like what their claims are about it and address that claim too. The arguments. He just says, nuh-uh. Need More Amalek says that's the dumbest argument. You mean him bringing it up from the start?
Mythicist argument that people make is that if Jesus' life, as described in the Gospels, follows certain set patterns that you can see in Old Testament stories, or in myths about dying and rising gods, or in tales told about other religious figures, that if these stories are in these set traditions, then probably Jesus didn't exist. I've never found this persuasive either. Most historical figures that we have accounts of have legendary tales told about them in set patterns.
Whoa. You don't think it's convincing that almost everything we know about Jesus is based on some scripture or prophecy? Clearly midrash. If 90% of what's in the Bible is midrash, why not 100%? Also, if there's a framework of a dying and rising God or a belief in a suffering Messiah, a Messiah that would be pierced, crucified, rejected by his people because the scripture said so. Dude, his arguments are just so bad.
For George Washington, it's true for Julius Caesar, it's true for the founding.
No, but we know those people existed. They have way better evidence than Jesus. The only stories that we have about George Washington are not magical, mythical, son of God stories. We have regular histories with a story about chopping down a cherry tree, like a little bit of legend and lore added on an obvious historical person. Dude, to pretend George Washington and Jesus is like the same type of evidence, and because they embellished and exaggerated some lore about Washington, that Jesus being a superhero that fulfills every single prophecy isn't just a story fulfilling prophecies. Dude, I already won the debate, I feel like, with his opening statement getting wrecked, to be honest.
Hasidic Judaism, the Baal Shem Tov, who allegedly could heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead and be transfigured before his followers. Does that mean he didn't exist? No, everybody knows the Baal Shem Tov existed. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
but there's also myths that started as myth. There's also mythical figures that didn't exist. So Jesus didn't exist. He's saying some myth is added to real people. Okay, well, some myths start as myths, so Jesus was a myth. Dude, his argumentation and his logic just is so flawed.
Is by giving point after point. Let me just give you one more detailed illustration.
Okay, I'm way louder than the video. All right, I'll fix that. Thank you for telling me. I'm getting worked up, dude. I got to check my heart rate. I'm worked up over this stuff. It really gets me, grinds my gears, man. Hell. Holy shit.
Octavian, Caesar Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Literally, he was allegedly the son of God. He was miraculously born. He was revered as the son of God by his devotees. He ascended to heaven. He is a divine being worthy of worship. There are all these tales told about him. Does that mean he didn't exist? No, it means that when you tell stories about him, you tell these stories in certain ways. This is typically what happens.
Also, we don't make the argument.
Famous people are told in terms of stereotypes. We have our own stereotypes. We have the rags to riches story. We have the politician's sexual exploits story. We have the divine savior story. The fact that stories are molded to a model has no bearing on whether the person actually existed or not. Now let me get to my positive argument. Jesus of Nazareth is one of the best attested Palestinian Jews of the entire first century. From the year 1 of the Common Era, 1 CE.
Wrong. He's wrong about that too. Josephus writes about John the Baptist. That's already better. He didn't write about Jesus. That's an interpolation. He writes about John the Baptist. That we have an inscription of Pilate at the time, so that's better attestation. Just because you have one mythical, you have Paul's letters and he never knew a Jesus, and then you've got the Gospels, which are clearly symbolic fiction, midrashic, literary constructs. That's not good attestation. There's lots of lore about somebody, but it's not attestation of a historical person. Josephus, we have way better evidence Josephus existing in the first century than Jesus as well. Philo, we know way more about Philo. We have Philo's, we have books of Philo. We know better attestation is the books Philo wrote in the first century. No books for Jesus. So how does everything he say so wrong?
On Rumble, unrelated to the topic at hand, but what is your official position on atheism? And what is your opinion on Alex O'Connor?
That's so weird. I was just talking to Gnostic Informant like 20 minutes ago about Alex O'Connor. That is so crazy. I think he's super soft. If the leading atheist debater on the internet is Alex O'Connor and he's so soft on Christianity, it's just like, we're cooked.
Year 100 CE, we know that there were hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Palestine. How many of those Jews are better attested than Jesus? 1. Josephus the historian. He's attested better only because he left us multiple writings. If you look only at external attestation for first century Palestinian Jews, Jesus actually is much better than Josephus. We have 4 Gospels written about him. These Gospels come from the very next generation.
You've got one Gospel, Mark, and then the rest copy him, okay? Not 4. They're copies of one another. Come on, dude, you know this. Synoptic problem. So you have one story that's clearly myth. It talks about everything about it is fulfilling some prophecy. It starts off as Isaiah the prophet said. And that's 40 plus years after he supposedly died, after the temple's destroyed, and you can't even go back and know anything that really happened that long ago. Like, it's so good evidence. He's the first century attestations, 4 Gospels. That's crazy. Amalek's laughing. It's amazing. Is this not amazing? I did not remember his opening statement being so awful. Debunk right there, Nate Live. Debunked. I need a Coors Light. I thought that too. I need a Budweiser or a Coors Light. Nah, dude, we're just drunk on the Lord tonight, on the Lord. Not drinking nothing but the Jesus juice. The Holy Spirit. We're high on the Holy Spirit.
With Josephus, we have 0 negative accounts of the Jewish historian Josephus. How many narrative accounts do we have for the most powerful religious figure in Jesus' day, Caiaphas, the high priest Caiaphas? We have no narrative accounts. How many narrative accounts do we have for Pontius Pilate, the most powerful man in first century Palestine? We have no narrative accounts. How many accounts do we have for anyone else in first century Palestine? We have no narrative accounts. It's not even close.
Yeah, but having a narrative account, how many copies of Spider-Man are there compared to Joe Schmo preacher in Alabama? Like that's the equivalent. Having lots of stories about a figure, like there's lots of do we know more about some street preacher in ancient Egypt, or do we know about Osiris and Horus and the gods, the mythical gods? Do we know more about some fringe philosopher that died with a few followers in Greece, or we know about Zeus and their gods? Having lots of stories about a god figure, like comparing, we've got these stories about Jesus. Yeah, they're magical god stories, though. Not like real biographical, historical figure type of genre. Jeez.
Are non-problematic. As some of you know, I've made an entire career out of arguing that they're problematic. There are enormous problems with the Gospels. And so Bob and I are not going to be disagreeing about that. They are absolutely problematic. But they are four narratives about a person living in first century Palestine, and they do give us a lot of real information.
Four narratives. Four narratives. It's one narrative, dude. Come on. Four narratives. Four independent attestations. It's anonymous. No date, no place, anonymously written. He knows all this. And then he's like, and we know we can get reliable information. No, that's your presupposition that you remove all the magic and the prophecy fulfilling, and then there must be some real kernel of truth. You're starting at that presupposition.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not simply one gospel in four forms. They are four gospels based on different literary and oral sources. The Gospel of Mark was probably written sometime...
Wrong. No, this is under the Q framework, where Q is not necessary. Not necessary at all. It's Mark. Matthew copied Mark and added on a little bit of his own. You don't know that it came from another source. He could have made it up also. And then you got Luke doing the same to Matthew and Mark. No Q needed. Q's been debunked by Goodacre. He's the expert on Q. Come on, dude. Get with the times. He counts Q as another independent source, too. He's added in all these other hypotheticals. HLMN, all these things.
70 of the Common Era. Jesus died around the year 30 of the Common Era. Mark is absolutely based on oral traditions that the author had heard. Matthew and Luke used Mark as one of their sources, but they had other sources available to them.
No. He says, how does he know how much of Matthew is based on oral sources? How do we know that he didn't just know some of the epistles or the book of Hebrews and some of Paul's letters or something? How do you know that? Does Mark say, this is based on oral traditions and legends of Jesus? No, he doesn't say that. He says, as the prophet Isaiah foretold. That's how Mark starts. So, wrong.
Had one other source that they shared together that no longer exists. Scholars call it Q. Matthew had other sources that Luke did not have. Luke had other sources that Matthew did not have. That means prior to the writing of the Gospels, you've got sources for Mark, different sources for Matthew and Luke, different sources for Matthew, different sources for Luke, and we're not even talking about John, which didn't use Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and had different sources of his own.
What? Amalek, did you hear that? He's saying John didn't use Matthew, Mark, and Luke as a source? It was my understanding that it's the exact opposite. Yeah, Amalek is laughing again, saying, yeah, fucking right. Yeah, that is, it was my understanding. I thought the scholars all believed that John did know, came after Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and definitely knew Luke. Remember, we covered this on the show a while back, Amalek. He definitely knew Luke because he includes one of the aspects of the Gospels that's only in Luke. So he knew. Wrong again. Dude, I shouldn't, me, like an armchair amateur historian mythicist, shouldn't be able to so easily decimate every little bit of Bart Ehrman's opening statement like this. I'm sorry.
These are multiple independent sources from the first century. How is it possible that you have so many sources about somebody who never existed? These sources.
See what I'm saying too? Even assuming, okay, I'll give you as many hypotheticals as you want. How do you know that they're all not originated in a myth? You could grant Q. Does Q prove a historical Jesus, or is Q just also about a mythical figure? There's so much independent attestation. There's 4 gospels, and then all these other hypothetical gospels that I'm making up right now for this argument. Like, you can't, if your argument is he existed because of all these hypothetical sources that you are asserting existed with no proof. Problems.
Are independent of each other. They're not copying one another. You have independent sources from before the Gospels.
They're not copying each other? What? Who is he kidding?
These sources have traditions in them that almost certainly go back to Aramaic-speaking Palestine. sources records
all these Greek sources almost certainly go back to another language. Yeah, dude. Because you say so?
Jesus in which he uses Aramaic words known only in Palestine. Some of the sources contain stories that make sense if you translate them back into Aramaic, better sense than they make when they're
Okay. So some of the Jesus lore started with the Jews in their original language. So what? Stories of Jesus started in Hebrew and Aramaic with the Jews. So what? Still could be a myth. Doesn't mean it didn't start as a myth, a midrashic myth in Aramaic. Again, isn't this crazy, Amalek? Every point he has is flawed. I have a chapter in my book about debunking Bart Ehrman, and I get a lot of quotes from the top mythicists about Ehrman, and they are spot on with his fallacies and his flawed logic and his apologetics, his bad arguments. It is bad.
Greek. That shows the story started out as Aramaic stories. You have Aramaic stories about Jesus from Palestine, years before the Gospels.
Okay, but what is that? It could have been mythical Aramaic stories, though, in your hypothetical sources. If we're in the business of just being able to invent hypothetical sources and then say that's the evidence, I win, well, then I'm inventing all of these other books that were clearly a mythical heavenly Jesus that said it explicitly, but those were lost and those were destroyed by the historicist Orthodox sect. Oh yeah, my hypotheticals definitely prove that Jesus is a midrash and did not exist on earth. But they're just lost. The hypotheticals are gone, and we have the later historicized, harmonized ones. So there you go.
Stories in Aramaic Palestine that almost certainly go back to the 30s of the Common Era. Multiple sources. This is far better than anybody that we have in Palestine in the entire first century. It's better than almost anybody we have in the ancient world, with exceptions that we all could probably cite.
Yeah, well, hey, Bart, who is it bragging about, oh, we have so much stuff about Jesus, but not anybody else? Well, was it not the Christians for centuries that were in charge of making copies and preserving all of these texts? And how many books did Christians about Greek philosophers or Roman philosophers or Roman skeptics or Romans that were critics of Christianity, how many of those either didn't get saved or got burned by the Christians because they were in charge of keeping everything? It takes some chutzpah to brag about having all this Christian historical writings and literature when they were the ones in charge of maintaining all the literature.
Sorry, my timer just went off.
Good.
Rats. Okay, hold on a second.
How does he get away with this? I don't know.
Shut up.
Yeah, good one, Amalek. I didn't mention that one. Herod, too. He says Jesus is the best attested Jew of Palestine in the first century. What about Herod? So much more for Herod. Wrong again. He shouldn't be, dude, a scholar, a professor. He's considered like his generation's top scholar. And he's making mistakes like this. I'm ripping him to pieces with like every sentence he says. It's pitiful. And this is their poster boy for, even Bart Ehrman says.
I'm on this. Right. Hold on. Sorry. 13 minus 17. Go. Okay. Right. We have writings of Paul. The Apostle Paul was not a follower of Jesus. He was living in a later generation. We have 13 letters that allegedly went under, that not allegedly went under Paul's name, but we have 13 letters that do go under Paul's name. Of these 13 letters that the Apostle Paul wrote, 7 of them are letters that he actually wrote. There are 6 of the letters that Paul probably did not write. 7 letters that Paul really did write. The reason this is important is because Paul was writing before the Gospels. The Gospels were not the first books of the New Testament to be written. They were relatively late. Paul's writings were being produced in the 50s of the Common Era. In other words, about 25 years from the traditional date of Jesus' death, between 20 and 30 years of Jesus' traditional death. We can establish a relatively rough chronology for Paul's life. This chronology is going to be important for a couple of points that I want to make. The chronology of Paul's life is possible because in Paul's letters, he'll sometimes make an off-the-cuff biographical comment. 3 years ago, I did this. 14 years later, I did this. So you get these biographical statements with years, and so based on that, you can reconstruct a chronology. If you know when he was writing, you can count backwards and figure out when what happened. Based on the chronology that is accepted by virtually everybody, Paul originally started out as a persecutor of Christians soon after Jesus' death, probably within 2 years of Jesus' death. Paul was a persecutor of the Christians. The fact that he was a persecutor of the Christians is interesting and important. If Paul converted in, say, the year 33, and he had been persecuting Christians based on what he heard about them in the year 32, that means Paul had heard about Christians and Christianity within 2 years.
All of this dating, though, is predicated on Jesus existing and dying in 30 or 33 AD. Okay? So if Jesus didn't exist and he was a mythical logos, like heavenly angel-like figure that was developing over many decades, then you can't say Paul is proof Jesus existed because he started talking about Jesus in this year. If he never existed, then when Paul started talking about him is kind of irrelevant. See the point? Why it's not a strong point?
The traditional date of Jesus' death, probably about 2 years after Jesus had died. If that's the case, it would be worth knowing, what does Paul know about the historical Jesus? Paul's views of Jesus are really important, as I think Bob and I would both agree. Paul does not talk about a heavenly cosmic figure, Joshua or Jesus, who was crucified by demons in outer space, the way mythicists have often said.
Yes, he does. Oh, he doesn't explicitly say it's demons in outer space. He says it's the archons of this eon. He does. Oh, okay, I'll right back at you, Bart. Does he say the Romans killed Jesus? He doesn't, does he? It's ambiguous at best. And clearly he means the archons of the age, the God of this world, what does he say? The sky? Not the God of the sky. What does he say?
Paul talks about a real historical figure, Jesus, a Jew among Jews, a preacher, teacher, who was crucified by his earthly opponent.
He doesn't give one story of Jesus giving any teachings or being a preacher. He doesn't use the word disciple. This is you claiming that it's you reading those things into Paul's letters.
Yes, Paul thought that Jesus was a divine being who was also a human being. Paul does think that Jesus was a divine being who was also a human being. But he firmly believes that this divine being became a human being. Jesus
No. They say in the likeness of a man, not actually a man, in the likeness of a man. And they said he was of flesh. But Paul also says that there's heavenly bodies of flesh and there's human bodies of flesh, or earthly bodies of flesh. Yeah, he says Jesus is not of this world and he's fighting the principalities of darkness in evil, meaning demons, meaning sky demons, meaning Satan. The rulers of this age and the archons of the age, the rulers of this age and the ruler of the air, who is Satan in Jewish cosmology, that's who crucified him. Paul doesn't ever talk about an empty tomb or a virgin birth or Pilate. He doesn't mention Pilate, doesn't mention Judas betraying him, none of this stuff. So Bart's just gaslighting right now. Yeah, he thought he was a divine being that he said he knew not from any man through the scriptures. Are you going to address that?
Taught and was crucified.
No way. Jimmy Dore had on Melk. I'm not surprised at all. Yeah. Russia shill fest. Ruler of the air. That's what I was looking for. The ruler of this age and the ruler of the air. Clearly they're talking about Satan in the firmament. He says, Paul did not say, this is disingenuous. Let me back this up. He goes, Paul did not say that Jesus was crucified by demons in the air. No, he doesn't explicitly say that, but he also doesn't say he was crucified by Roman soldiers and Pilate and Herod. He doesn't say that either.
in Palestine. Paul is often faulted for not saying more.
Paul never places him on earth. It never mentions him in Jerusalem. It's weird that he says Palestine too, because they weren't calling it Palestine in the first century.
About Jesus than he says. He doesn't talk about Jesus' baptism, his temptation, his Sermon on the Mount, his exorcisms, his triumphal entry, and lots of other things. He's faulted for not saying more on the grounds that if he knew more, he would have said more. That's possible, but it's not really probative. If you take 7 of my mother's letters, my mother is a very, very devout Christian.
Okay, this quote too.
Of her letters about...
No. I know what he's going to say. He's like, oh, everybody already knew all the biography of Jesus, and Paul was just giving directions and didn't have any need to ever mention any of these things. Wrong. For so many of his arguments, it would be advantageous for him to mention a historical detail of his life or to argue from what Jesus preached or said or what somebody told of him. Wrong. This is Christian apologetics type stuff right here, this argument.
About her Christianity, about her faith, about her beliefs, you will not find any references to Jesus' baptism, temptation, Sermon on the Mount, exorcisms, or triumphal entry. She just doesn't talk about those things in her letters, and either did Paul. Does it show that my mother doesn't believe those things about Jesus' life? No, it doesn't show that. It's not what she's talking about. These letters that we have of Paul are letters that Paul wrote to his congregations to deal with problems that they were having. If they weren't having problems, then he didn't write about them in his letters. What does Paul say? Paul tells us a number of important things about the historical Jesus based on what he knew. He indicates that Jesus was actually born physically, that he had a woman as his mother.
Oh my God.
That he came from the line of King David.
Oh my God. He shouldn't be able to do this. When Paul writes that Jesus is born of a woman, the word he uses for born in Greek is gnomenos or gnomeno, which means manufacture. Paul uses the same word for how he describes God manufacturing Adam in the Garden of Eden. And when he says he's born of a woman, he doesn't say Mary. He says he gives a metaphor of Sarah and Hagar being born under the law. So it's a metaphor. He says a few verses down that this is all figuratively. This is not him describing Jesus actually being born. It's a metaphor. This is his best example of Paul confirming that Jesus was a historical figure. A metaphor about Sarah and Hagar.
David, that he was born a Jew, that he was a Jewish Messiah, that he had brothers. One of them was named...
Well, yeah. Jesus, the heavenly Messiah, was considered the Jewish Messiah. That doesn't mean he existed. He called him the Jewish Messiah. Yeah, like the Son of Man, who is like a divine heavenly figure that sits on the throne next to God. Yeah, if you're making up a story about a Jewish Messiah, yeah, he's going to be the Jewish Messiah. If you're inventing a myth about the Jewish Messiah, he's going to be the Jewish Messiah. So don't tell me he's real because they thought he was because they called him the Jewish Messiah.
He preached to other Jews. He had 12 disciples. One of them was Peter.
Paul never mentions the disciples, and he never mentions Jesus preaching to anybody. Neither does Hebrews. Neither does anything before the Gospels.
Whom Paul knew. Jesus was a teacher. Paul explicitly cites several of Jesus' teachings. Jesus had a Last Supper with his...
No. But Paul learns of Jesus' teachings, and Jesus speaks to Paul through the Scriptures. Come on, Bart, you should know this. How does Paul learn everything he knows about Jesus? His only source of information about Jesus? Reading him from the Scriptures. Come on, Bart.
Jesus was crucified by the ruling authorities at the instigation of the Jewish authorities. Paul tells us these things. I want to focus on 2 points in particular that Paul states about Jesus. The first is one that is central to many of the debates about mythicism. It comes in Galatians chapter 1, verse 19, where Paul says that 3 years after his conversion, so this would be by my chronology about the year...
James, the brother of the Lord.
The Common Era. He says, after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to visit Cephas. I remained with him for 15 days. Cephas is Peter, Jesus' closest disciple. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. The brother of the Lord. Paul knows Jesus' brother, and he knows Jesus' closest disciple,
Yeah, the brother of the Lord.
Cephas. The word brother in the New Testament always means one of two things. A brother means a blood relative who's born to the same mother. That's one of the things it means. In other words, it means what brother means. The second thing it means is it sometimes often refers to members of the same believing community who stand in close solidarity. And so you can talk about your brothers, Jewish brothers, Christian brothers, depending on what.
Yeah, anybody baptized and a Christian was known as a brother and a sister. They're all fellow heirs, adopted children along with Jesus.
Those are the two things that brother means in unambiguous cases in the New Testament. If anyone wants to claim that the word brother means something else in any context, they're free to do that, but they need to have clear and compelling reasons for thinking so, other than the fact that they don't want to think that the word means what it means.
No, dude. We don't need another reason of what it means. It means a spiritual brother. Paul doesn't say like a brother of the flesh. He doesn't say anything to differentiate. I have a section on my book about this where I quote Bart and I quote Richard Carrier and I show their arguments up against one another because he won't debate Carrier. So I show their two arguments and Carrier's right. It's a spiritual brother. It's ambiguous at best, and this is the best argument you have. I have a whole chapter on James and get into James is a spiritual brother of the Lord, and James, like Paul, only knew him through the scriptures in a Gnostic, mystical way. There's the book, the Lost Ebionite book. Since we're doing hypotheticals, this isn't even a hypothetical. That we know there was a book that the Ebionites had, James and Cephas, called The Ascents of James. Ascension, mystical. James knew Jesus in a mystical, spiritual brother type of way. That's what it was.
In Paul's case, when he says that James was the...
Yeah, there's a reason he won't debate Carrier, because Carrier would run circles around him if he tried any of this bullshit. In fact, they haven't debated face-to-face, but the debate has been raging for the last decade online, and Carrier is crushing him. But Bart's got the Christians behind him. He's got the Christians in his camp. He's got many of the biblical scholars that are also Christians.
Of Jesus, what does he mean? He cannot mean simply that he was somebody who stood in close solidarity with Jesus, because he's contrasting James with Cephas. He's explaining that he met with Cephas and with the brother of the Lord, James. In other words, Cephas is not the brother of the Lord. You get the same phenomenon in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5.
Yes. Exactly. He's differentiating, saying that Cephas is the apostle Cephas. He calls him an apostle. And then the brother of the Lord, James, meaning not James the other apostle, James the just, another James that was just a baptized Christian. That's what that means. That's what the Greek there, which is a bit clunky, is. I believe it says what Carrier argues it says. He's not saying that Cephas, he's saying I met one apostle, Peter, and then James, the brother of the Lord, meaning a regular baptized Christian James. James is Jacob, a very common name. There's probably 1 in 20 people, 1 in 20 Jews at that time in Judea was probably named Jacob. It's like being named Mohammed almost. Most common Jewish name at the time.
Where Paul says that other people are allowed to take their wives with them, and so he too should be allowed to do so. Paul should be allowed to do so because other people take wives with them on their missions. And he says that Cephas doesn't, Apollos doesn't, Paul himself doesn't, but the brothers of the Lord do. That means that none of the others are the brothers of the Lord.
And that's the whole argument. You see, Paul never knew Jesus, but he's saying if even the brothers of the Lord, regular Christians, could bring a wife on their evangelical trips, then why shouldn't he? He should be able to bring a wife. So yeah, I know. To bring up these issues and act like this is your proof, when Carrier already wrote a book destroying these arguments, you don't just get to keep going back to the argument and ignore all the debunking and the counter arguments to this point. He doesn't do it.
Paul knew
He
James.
pretends like the counter arguments have not been made. Maybe he doesn't even know that they have been made. He doesn't actually read. He doesn't actually care to know.
He spent weeks with James. He knew Peter, Jesus' closest disciple. If Jesus didn't exist, then surely his best friend and his brother would know about it. They didn't know about it
Again,
because he did exist.
That's a quote from his book, Did Jesus Exist? If he did exist, his brother would know about it. Again, this is presupposing that there is a Jesus that existed and he was his brother. How about this? If Paul and James and all the first Christians knew that there was no historical Jesus and he was a heavenly mystical figure, then there would be no reason for James to say, hey guys, Jesus didn't exist. They'd be like, yeah, we know. Like, we see him in our revelations. He's in the scriptures. So again, these arguments are all predicated only if Jesus did exist. Do these arguments work? It's a bad argument. 26:20. I'm going to rewind it one more time for you guys to hear it.
Paul knew James. He spent weeks with James. He knew Peter, Jesus' closest disciple. If Jesus didn't exist, then surely his best friend and his brother would know about it. They didn't know about it because he did exist. Second point.
They didn't know about it. Because Peter and James don't say, hey guys, I don't want anybody to be confused, but he didn't exist. Hey, this guy that everybody thinks existed, which nobody did at the time, he didn't exist. That would never happen. That makes no sense. Such a garbage tier argument. I cannot believe he's saying these things. That makes no sense. If Jesus didn't exist, James wouldn't say, hey, he didn't exist. If Jesus didn't exist, there would be no reason for James to say he didn't exist because nobody thought he existed. Do you not get that?
That Paul has to tell us. Paul understands that Jesus was the crucified Messiah. This is the important point. Paul understands Jesus as the crucified Messiah. Two things to say about that. First, if a first century Jew talked about someone who was crucified, what do they have in mind? Romans crucified people all the time. When people talked about crucified people, what did they mean? You can read any ancient source. Read Josephus if you want to. Read any ancient source. What do people mean when they talk about someone who's crucified? They talk about the same thing time after time after time. They mean somebody that the Romans nailed or tied to a cross in order to publicly humiliate and torture to death. That's what they mean.
Wait a second. I'm pretty sure I remember Neil from Gnostic Informant telling me that there is the Greek word for crucified is in a pagan story about a pagan god also. Let's do a fact check real quick. Hold on. Let's see if ChatGPT gets it. Is the Greek word for crucified in the Bible found in any pagan other Greek sources before Christianity?
So the verb most often translated as to crucify, stauro, does show up in Christian Greek sources, although it was pretty rare. Earlier authors often used anastauro, meaning to impale or stake, and as Roman-style crucifixion spread, stauro became standard verb.
What is there any like mythical god stories where a figure is crucified with that Greek word?
Checking.
It might be so fringe that Neil found that.
Nothing solid comes up. We don't have any clear pre-Christian myths where God is crucified with that same Greek terminology. I compare like Prometheus found, but again, not crucifixion.
All right, I can't remember. I'll have to come back to that. Come back to that. Rain check. Pause.
Paul said that Jesus got crucified. What does he mean? He means the same thing. He doesn't mean that Jesus was killed in outer space by demonic power circling the globe. He's referring to a death that the Romans inflicted on criminals. That's what everybody means in the first century. Second.
No. Also, how come we have all these in Ascension of Isaiah, I think in Peter, the word is tree. They say he was crucified on a tree. The Romans weren't crucifying people on trees. Also, just because he says he's crucified, who is to say that Paul didn't believe that happened in heaven, like in Ascension of Isaiah, hung on a tree by Satan and his demons? If people are being crucified, if you're occupied by the Romans and they're crucifying you on earth, then who is to say that that idea of a crucifixion wasn't in the consciousness of first century Jews, and they can conceive of Jesus being pierced or crucified in heaven? I don't see his point here in the argument.
Did not exist. Let's just say, suppose he did not exist, then necessarily the Christians invented him. And so the big question, if the Christians invented Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, the Messiah, the Christ, would they invent the idea that as the Messiah, he got crucified?
Yes.
If you work hard enough at it, you might be able to imagine inventing a God who got killed and raised from the dead, as many mythicists say. But that's not what Paul talks about. Paul doesn't talk about God who was crucified. God was crucified for you. Paul talks about Christ who was crucified. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2.
What does that matter?
Among you except for Christ and him crucified.
What?
1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and following. I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, and was buried. By the way, he was buried. It's a little hard to do in the outer space.
No.
He was crucified.
No. You could be you could be buried in a mystical realm. Isn't there stuff about Adam and Eve being buried in heavenly realm? Third heaven, I think it was. Let me ask that again. Hold on. Let's ask ChatGPT. Is there somewhere in Jewish literature where Adam and Eve are buried in the third heaven?
Checking. Yes. In the life of Adam and Eve, a bit where Michael takes Adam's soul up into paradise to the third heaven till the day of judgment. But that's about his soul. His body, and Eve's as well, is buried elsewhere. Are you thinking about Paul's third heaven language?
Yeah, Paul even says he's caught up into the third heaven. His revelation of Jesus and the mystery is caught up into the third heaven, like a mystical ascension experience, like James and the ascents of James' lost Ebionite book. Crayon, you heard that Adam and Eve were buried somewhere in Utah? Yeah, the Mormons probably say that. Oh, thank you, Amalek. I thought you might get this. In Plato's Republic, even he has a perfect man who is regarded wicked by everyone, whipped, tortured, and then crucified. Same Greek word. I knew it. I think there's another one too that's where it uses the crucified word.
Somebody make up a Messiah, specifically the Messiah, who was crucified. It's important to understand what Jews meant. Paul was a Jew.
Dude, this is the other main argument from his book, Did Jesus Exist? He goes, Jews would not invent a crucified Messiah. Carrier, I just saw, it has a new peer-reviewed academic paper on Jews were expecting a suffering Messiah. So Ehrman, I have a section on my book about this too, about wrong. They could have invented a suffering Messiah that was crucified from the scriptures. You could see how it was derived from the scriptures. Isaiah 53 and Zechariah 12:10 and piercing verses, dying verses. And you can't invent a Messiah that was grandiose and conquered the Romans and was a military leader and sat on the throne and was the king of the world, because that hadn't happened. The only Messiah you could invent as a myth would be a unknown guy that got killed and only his close followers knew about it. Again, Ehrman's logic, deeply flawed, so bad, so astonishingly bad, I can't believe that they're able to get away with it like they have. It is a catastrophe that this has happened.
What Jews meant by the term Christ. In the days of Paul, there were some Jews who were expecting that a Messiah was going to come to the Jewish people sent from God. God would send a Messiah. The word Messiah actually comes from a Hebrew word, Mashiach, which means anointed one. Messiah is the same word as the Greek word Christ. The Hebrew word is Messiah, Greek word Christ. I have to tell my students this because many of my students think that Jesus Christ is his last name. Jesus Christ, born to Joseph and Mary Christ. And it doesn't mean Jesus the Messiah. Jews had various expectations of what this Messiah would be, the anointed one. This is a term that's originally used in Jewish scriptures to refer to the king of Israel. He was the anointed one. When the king was anointed at his coronation ceremony, like King David, King Solomon, this showed that God was putting his favor upon him. In Jesus' day, there hadn't been a king on the throne.
Troggy, you're right. Bart gets away with it because Christians are retards and have a propensity to fall for it every single time. They love this. Yeah, the Christians liking it has a big deal to do with it. Do you know what's sad? I just realized this guy, see what I'm saying? He's not a debater. He's too old for this or something, or just isn't a good debater. He's sitting here with his hands in his belly.
Sent $20.
Thank you.
Is George Floyd for the Jews? It's just another sad story to promote communism.
Yeah, I never heard it put that way, but yeah, that's funny. St. George. You know what I notice is that Price is just sitting here twiddling his thumbs with his hands on his belly. Dude, if Bart's making all of his key arguments right now, you should have your notebook out, jotting down, taking notes, all of his points, so then you can respond and debunk all his bullshit. What are you doing? You're slipping. When you're in a debate and your opponent is doing his opening statement, I am writing down so I can remember and address all and counter and refute all of his points. Why are you sitting there twiddling your thumbs, dude?
Nearly 600 years. Some people thought there would be a king on the throne, and they called him the anointed one, the Messiah. The Messiah was going to be a great warrior figure like David, a great warrior who drove out the enemy and set up God's kingdom by establishing a throne in Jerusalem, and Israel would once more be a sovereign state that would rule over its enemies. That's what the Messiah would do. Some Jews
if the Jews so strongly thought that was the only type of Messiah that would come, then why did Jesus' followers feel so strongly that he was the Messiah if he was nothing near that? His own argument undermines his argument. And he's so Christ-brained, he doesn't notice it. There's a paragraph in my book about that argument, and Carrie, you're calling him out on this. It's so good.
Messiah would be a cosmic figure who would destroy the forces of evil and set up God's kingdom on earth, a mighty cosmic judge. There were various expectations of what the Messiah would be, but there was one thing that all of the expectations had in common. Jews who expected a Messiah expected a great, powerful figure who would destroy the enemy and set up God's kingdom. And who was Jesus? The Christians said,
and again, okay, if that's
was crucified.
That's one. There's no like concrete only one view of the Messiah. There's a diversity among Jews. All right? If they're learning what the Messiah is based on the scriptures, well, that's open to interpretation. And some Jews clearly were ignoring the regular context and interpreting whatever verse they wanted to be about the Messiah. And then when you do that, Isaiah 53, the servant, also Bart Ehrman's destroyed here too. We know that pre-Christian Jews were already connecting the Son of Man with the servant of Isaiah. They were already connected in the book of Enoch. I wonder if Carrier makes that argument in his paper.
Criminal. If you wanted to make up a story about the Messiah, would you make up the story that the Messiah had been crucified? That's the opposite of what the Messiah is supposed to be.
Bart, you can't, dude, how does he not get this? Dude, this is so Christian apologetic argument. You cannot invent a myth of a Messiah that conquers the Romans, because everybody would look around and say, hey, the Romans are still in charge. How does he not get how bad of an argument this is? It makes feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm taking crazy pills here. Can you throw me a bone?
You'd make up the story that, well, he actually drove out the Romans and he is sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. Why didn't they make up that story? Because it obviously wasn't true. The early Christians were not going around saying that God had been crucified. They were saying that Christ had been crucified. Well, why did they do that if it didn't make any sense to expect a crucified Messiah?
Oh my God, for him to say, sure, there's dying and rising gods, but Jesus wasn't a god. He was the Messiah. What's the difference, dude? He was a demigod, pre-existent angel, like God's logos. Like, talk about splitting hairs here. Dude, this is what would happen, okay? If I was Dr. Price listening to his opening statement, I would be writing everything that I'm pausing and saying to you. I would be jotting down bullet points so I could remember and then say the thing. And Price is not doing any of that.
True Siggy sent $5.
Thank you, Siggy.
Not sure if you got my last no.
I didn't see
What
it.
is your official position on atheism? And what is your opinion of Alex O'Connor?
Oh, I did. I saw that. I addressed it.
No.
My position on atheism is I'm agnostic, atheism leaning. Is that what you mean by my position? And Alex O'Connor, he's soft, and I don't watch him. He's boring and soft and weak and too pro-Christian still, and he's a Jesus historicist. He won't go into that, or maybe he has. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, not a fan. Boring.
Messiah, and they knew that he got crucified. You can't explain the crucified Messiah as something that was made up.
Wrong. Wrong. The Christians are making up all types of stories about Jesus based on scripture, midrashically. They would never invent a crucified Messiah. I have a whole chapter in my book addressing that claim from Bart Ehrman. I wonder what Robert Price is going to say. I got to shut up and go fill up my drink. But I'm telling you, they're going to go to, what happens is they go to Price, and he has a 30-minute opening statement, I think it is. Way too long of an opening statement, by the way. This is retarded. Should be 10 minutes at max, 15 maybe, and then get into the back and forth. We'll skip to the back and forth. But they go to Price, and he just gives like he tries to be like a fancy writer and be poetic and like doesn't make any good points. Terrible debate opening statement from what I remember.
The crucified Messiah is because people thought Jesus was the Messiah, and they knew that this man had been killed as a crucified criminal.
No.
That's why Paul says that the crucifixion of Jesus was the greatest stumbling block for Jews. It was the one reason most Jews rejected the Christian claim that Jesus was the Messiah. Most Jews thought the claim was crazy.
Hold on. The idea that not every Jew believed in a mystical crucified Messiah is, so what? Some of them still did. Just because the majority of Jews, maybe it was a stumbling block to think that a mystical Messiah was midrashically known to be crucified. So what? That doesn't mean that a sect or a faction of Messianic Jews couldn't have innovated that idea. Again, with the flawed logic. Just because you know a lot about the Bible and you're a professor doesn't mean you make good arguments and have good logic on things.
Absurd. The Messiah is crucified. Well, it's like a contradiction in terms. Of course he wasn't crucified. So why did Christians say it? They had no choice because they knew that the man Jesus had been crucified. Let me sum up. Jesus is one of the two best attested Palestinian Jews of the first century. We have numerous sources that talk about him. These sources
That's it? He's already repeating his bad argument he started with? That's all we're going to get? Dude, see what I'm saying? How bad this is? How bad the case is?
The sources are problematic. They are historically difficult. Historians spend their lives trying to figure out what in them is historical and what is not.
Yeah, and all of that is supposing that it's not all myth to begin with. They're all assuming that there is a historical core, and if they just rip away the stuff with different criteria, or that's obviously myth, or that is based on scripture, and then we know whatever's left is the real. There's a historical Clark Kent when you remove all the Superman stuff. No. Clark Kent is still a mythical figure in a fictional story.
nothing historical in them. There is historical information in them. You have to find it. Included with the historical sources, though, are also the writings of the Apostle Paul. Paul, within 2 years of Jesus' life, absolutely knew that he was a historical figure, that he was a Jewish.
Whoa! To claim Paul absolutely knew he was a historical figure is just absurd, criminal. It should be criminal, actually. And again, Paul knew within 2 years of his life. That's assuming that Jesus lived and died at that time. If Jesus didn't die, then Paul's letters about Jesus, there could have been Christians talking about a Jesus figure for decades before, and it was a mythical logos heavenly figure. He's already back to this, checkmate atheists. Yeah, that's the problem, Chalky Chog. Robert Price the whole time is just daydreaming that he's really Superman. That's why he fumbled this debate so bad.
Preacher and teacher who ended up on the wrong side of the law and was crucified.
Can you believe it? He's really sitting here not taking one single note. 1.5 million people watch this. It looks like they're in some big university auditorium, and he sat there and twiddled his thumbs instead of taking notes to address all his claims.
By the Roman authorities. Let me end with a final word, something that I tell my students, my Christian students in North Carolina, but I think it would be appropriate here as well. That is that on this or any other topic, I hope you do not decide to believe only what's convenient. I have to tell my students this. Only what you want to believe or what you would like to be right. If you want to know if something is true, you should look at the evidence and then decide. If you decide that it's true, you should accept it and deal with it. It may change your broader perspective, or it may not. But in either case, you will at least be basing your perspective on what you have reason to believe to be true. Thank you very much.
Great closing statement, dude. Oh, believe the evidence. Yeah, great idea. All right, here we go. Let's see it.
All right. And now, Dr. Bob Price will present the mythicist position.
Is there a man behind the curtain? I guess you might say that I think not only that there is no great and powerful Oz, but that there's not even a man behind the curtain. Bart, on the other hand, agrees Oz is an illusion, but if you pull back the curtain, you'll find the anticlimactic Professor Marvel. First, is Christ mythicism some kind of novelty dreamed up by skeptics living far enough after the events to be able to get away with it? Bart and many others think so. Quote, he says, the idea that Jesus did not exist is a modern notion. It has no ancient precedents. Quote again, even the enemies of the Jesus movement thought that Jesus had existed. Among their many slurs against the religion, his non-existence is never one of them, close quote. I'm not so sure of that. Justin Martyr ascribes to his dialogue partner Trypho the allegation, quote, you have received a futile rumor and have created some sort of Christ for yourselves, end quote. We always hear apologists explain this away as if it meant you Christians have nominated your own Christ, or you Christians pretend your Jesus was the Christ. But that's rather different. Would the rabbi have said that the partisans of...
And if Ehrman makes that argument that, oh, there's not people in ancient times saying Jesus didn't exist, how do you know that they didn't, and then the Christians just didn't respond to those claims? A lot of the books critical of Christianity got burned and destroyed, or just not recopied and translated and stuff. So we've lost like 90% plus of books and writings from the ancient world. And the Christians were in charge, and they saved their stuff, and even then they don't have early mentions of Jesus. And I forgot where I was going. I was going to make one more point there.
Had created their own Messiah? I don't think so.
Oh, also, we only have writings of the skeptics and critics of Christianity in the writings of the Christian apologists and the church fathers. So we only have the things they responded to and they addressed. And probably people in ancient times, just like today, they thought instead of arguing that he didn't exist, they can just argue that it's stupid or it doesn't make sense or there's other explanations. There's no magical man born of a virgin. His mother probably just lied or something like that. That's a better argument, because it's hard for them to know that somebody didn't exist. There's no Google, there's no newspapers, there's no ways of going back decades and verifying if somebody existed or not. So many problems with that argument.
It seems less contrived to take Trypho as charging that the Christian Savior was a figment of pious imagination. Celsus, the 2nd century critic of Christianity, says, according to Origen, "It is clear to me that the writings of the Christians are a lie, and that your fables have not been well enough constructed to conceal this monstrous fiction." And then there's good old 2 Peter 1:16 through 18. "We did not follow cleverly devised myths when we told you of the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." End quote. Now, it's interesting. Some are alleging that we, ostensibly Simeon Peter, as the letter starts, and his colleagues were devising myths about the coming of Jesus. That sounds to me like an accusation that Christians had fabricated the whole business. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that's what happened, right? I'm just saying that that was an ancient view. Well, I picture the emergence of Jesus Christ like that moment when, in the process of evolution, enough small mutations accumulate to cross the taxonomical line to amount to a new species.
I like that. I like that. See, that's what I was saying too. It evolved. It was a figure, an angelic Metatron, Enoch, Son of Man, suffering Messiah, Melchizedek type of figure that evolved and mutated, and it was in different sects, and it was like a meme. It was a meme that developed lore built on top of it, and people interpreted this meme differently. That's how it developed. Okay, I was really hard on Price. So far, not so bad. Let's see.
Long time. But Bart is attacking the committee invention model of Jesus, and I think that's a straw man, though it's one created by mythicists. That they like network execs sitting around, what are we going to do with the protagonist of this show? I think that is absurd. And I believe I detect here, however, a fault line running beneath this whole argument. At least 14 times that I counted in Did Jesus Exist, Bart says we can trace traditions of Jesus back to within a very few years of Jesus' supposed crucifixion. For Bart, mythicism assumes that schemers invented Jesus at the same point in history when the Gospels have Jesus appear. But if there was no historical Jesus, as we wild-eyed, tinfoil hat-wearing mythicists, suggest, the bottom falls out of the whole thing.
Yeah.
No way to determine when the timeline began. No way to say what or when counts as early.
There we go. I made that point exactly, too. You can't say Paul was within 2 years of Jesus, the historical Jesus. He's like, no, he wasn't. If there was no historical Jesus, he's not. We don't know. There is no years close to when Jesus died. Same with the Gospels. We say like, oh, it's 4 decades after Jesus supposedly died. But if Jesus is invented and a figure that evolved, a meme figure that evolved over God knows how long, maybe even with Philo or before Philo, with his Logos figure. I like the way he put it too, but I feel like it's a little too. The way he talks is in like, how do I describe it?
Quote, in nearly all our sources, Peter was Jesus' most intimate companion and confidant for his entire public ministry after his baptism, end quote, seems to presuppose the factual character of the narrative, which is just the point at issue.
Yes.
I think that's like invoking Dr. Watson as a witness to a historical Sherlock. Well, Bart well expresses and then deconstructs a common mythicist objection to Jesus' historical existence.
Sherlock Holmes existed because Watson said he did, because Watson was friends with him. Well, Watson knew and wrote about Sherlock Holmes within 1 year of him dying. But same argument.
Could non-Christian writers have ignored a man who performed miracle after miracle to great public acclaim? But Bart replies the contemporary writers would probably not have taken much notice of any historically plausible Jesus, an itinerant sage and faith healer, one who did not miraculously multiply food, turn water into wine.
Look, too. See, Ehrman's writing down as fast as he can to address his points when he gets back up there. He knows.
Water, raise the rotting dead, banish storms at sea, and so forth. Isn't this like asking whether the historical Superman really had superhuman powers beyond those of ordinary men? Should we decide that there was indeed a historical Superman, but that he was merely Clark Kent? Bart says, you can shape a tradition about Jesus any way you want so that it looks highly legendary, but that has no bearing on the question of whether whether beneath the legendary shaping lies the core of the historical event. Well, let's try to imagine what some of these hypothetical, pre-legendary original stories might have looked like. Could this be the original core behind Mark 5, 1 through 13? They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and a great herd of swine was grazing on the hillside. But immediately some wild dogs began to bark, and the swine took fright and stampeded down the steep hillside, and they were drowned in the sea. The end. Or how about a possible historical core of Mark 5:21 and following? When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him. He was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and besought him, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. While he was still speaking, there came from...
See, this is bad. This is bad. He's going right into some story, some deep story, and he's going to say it's got some pagan parallel or it's a prophecy fulfilling. This time is too valuable. You should be bullet pointing and this argument and that argument and this argument. You can't get right into people already are dozing off. You're going into story time now, dozing off on a long story. Not good. You should say it. What you're trying to say with this story probably is he's a fake fulfillment of prophecy. Say something like that instead of doing the whole story.
Some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? And Jesus said to him, my poor man, you have my sympathies. Now who's up for lunch? Could this be the historical core of Mark 6:32-44?
Yeah, Amalek. That was the other one that I thought about too. Amalek says in the Odyssey, the pig scene, the gospel story with Jesus and the swine is a retelling of that. When I saw that scene, that was the first thing I thought of. You're right. Just like Jesus casts the legion into pigs, Circe turns the soldiers into pigs. You're right.
Went ashore, he saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a lonely place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the country and the surrounding...
See, too long. This is too long.
And he answered them, you have said it. And he dispersed the crowd, and they all ate and were satisfied. Or one more, could this be the basis of Mark 6:45-51? Immediately he dismissed the crowd, and he made his disciples get into the boat to go to the other side, to Bethsaida. And he got into the boat with them. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea. What's left? Who would even have remembered these unremarkable incidents if in fact they happened? And why would it have occurred to anyone to embellish them? In terms of evolution, these tepid anecdotes would have had no survival value. To treat such gospel episodes the way Bart suggests, if I'm hearing him right, is to trim away the element that would have caused the story to be passed on in the first place. Sounds like the old-time Protestant rationalism ridiculed.
That's a good point too. If you remove the magical parts, there'd be no point to even tell the story to begin with. So what's the point of adding all of this magical lore and embellishments to some real story? What's the point of adding it to it if it was just some mundane nothing? Some itinerant preacher that didn't do any miracles. Why feel so strongly to have to add all the lore to it? And why would the story of that historical figure be preserved if there's nothing special about it? Not a bad point.
By D.F. Strauss, boiling the spectacular down to the mundane just to provide a toehold on historical reality. This is a modern version of ancient euhemerism, the attempt to salvage the myths of the gods and heroes by positing that they were mythologized versions of ancient celebrities. Osiris was a king, Ares a mighty warrior, Asclepius a doctor, Hercules a weightlifter, Apollo the owner of a tanning salon. Could the Christian religion have begun with the modest historical figure Bart and his colleagues have whittled from the oak of the Gospels? There was no such historical figure. Jesus possesses the grandeur of the mythical demigods because that's what he was. That's why no contemporary historian mentions him. Section subheading, Testimonium Flimsianus. Did Jesus come in for mention by ancient historians? Bart regards the well-known statements of Pliny the Younger and Cornelius Tacitus about Christos and Crestus as textually authentic as they may well be. But as he readily admits, these writers quite likely learned what they said about Christ, not Jesus, interestingly, from Christians. Here are multiple attestations of hearsay. The weakness and scantiness of these attestations only accentuate the paucity of the supposed non-Christian documentation of a historical Jesus. And then we have to ask, why are the Gospels witnesses to Jesus any better founded? Bart says that, quote, stories about Jesus circulated widely throughout the major urban areas of the Mediterranean from a very early time. Our written sources are based on oral traditions. In other words, hearsay, just like Pliny and Tacitus. Thomas Arnold famously said that the resurrection of Jesus was the best attested fact in history. But as R.G. Collingwood observed, its being well attested only proves that a lot of people believed it, not that it happened.
Yeah.
Did Josephus mention Jesus? Bart says, quote, the majority of scholars of early Judaism and experts on Josephus think that one or more Christian scribes touched up the passage a bit. If one takes out the obviously Christian comments, the passage may have been rather innocuous, end quote. Nothing like he was the Messiah, right? No resurrection appearances, which the standard text of Josephus mentions. Bart ventures that, quote, the pared down version of Josephus contains very little that could have been used by the early Christian writers to defend Jesus and his followers from attacks by pagan intellectuals, end quote. His point is that the unspectacular version cannot have begun as a wholesale Christian interpolation, so it must be genuine to Josephus, right? But my question would be, why would Josephus mention such a non-entity? Who does the Daily Planet report on, Superman or Clark Kent? The scaled-down version of the passage, omitting he was the Christ and the resurrection appearances, makes as little sense as the authentic words of Josephus as they do as a Christian interpolation. Paul J. Hopper, an authority on the linguistics of classical literature, has, in my opinion, decisively refuted the scaled-down non-interpolation theory. He compares the testimonium treatment of Pilate with the adjacent Pilate episodes in the context in Josephus and concludes that the testimonium is, after all, a Christian interpolation intended to rehabilitate the image of Jesus and to shift the blame for his death from Pilate to the Jews. In the authentic Pilate stories, the procurator initiates actions against the Jews, but in the testimonium, he is manipulated by the Jewish leaders. Jesus is no more of a protagonist. Everything said of him occurs by way of allusions and at arm's length. In summary fashion, all aimed at vindicating the Christian movement in the writer's day. That is to say, despite all this, the faith goes on, quote, and up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out, which is kind of interesting. In the pared-down version, Christ doesn't occur. He's Jesus, so Christians couldn't have been named after another name than Jesus, I should think. The testimonium first appears in Eusebius' demonstration of the gospel. Our copies of Josephus are centuries later than that, and many scholars have suggested it was Eusebius' writing, falsely ascribed to Josephus, that crept into our later copies of Josephus. Ken Olson shows how, whereas the testimonium passage sticks out like a sore thumb in the text of the Antiquities, where scribes inserted it, thinking they were restoring an accidental scribal omission, the passage fits its Eusebian context so well that, well, you'd think it was made for the purpose, and it was. The particular things said about Jesus in the testimonium all address specific pagan criticisms of Christian beliefs about Jesus current in Eusebius' own day, and which Eusebius is pointedly discussing in the context. Bart dismisses suggestions that this or that historical Jesus-leaning passage in Paul's epistles is a subsequent interpolation. He says, quote, here we find textual studies driven by convenience. If a passage contradicts your views, simply claim that it was not written by the author, end quote. But aren't consensus scholars doing the same darn thing with the Testimonium Flavianum? They dearly want Josephus to have mentioned Jesus, but the passage as it stands, they admit, cannot have been the work of a non-Christian Jew like Josephus. It's a bad text for their purposes, so they redact it, as Matthew redacted Mark, in order to make it suitable for their use. Just exercise the line item veto, remove the offending passages. Now we can use it as evidence to establish a historical Jesus.
You know, I think part of why his opening statement isn't crushing is the way he's reading. He wrote it and he's reading it out. He's like reading through it fast. It seems just very like scripted, fast and scripted.
No, you can't.
Not that that's bad, but just like the delivery of it, I feel like it's not landing.
Bridge to nowhere. Most Jesus scholars believe one can build a bridge from the canonical Gospels over to the historical Jesus. Suppose the Gospels themselves are based on prior Gospels. That helps, but if we run out of planks, maybe we can close the rest of the distance by tossing sturdy ropes of oral tradition over to the other side. Bart enumerates the pre-Gospel Gospels, the hypothetical sources used by Matthew and Luke, namely Mark, which of course we know exists, Q, M, and L. Matthew and Luke each used both Q and Mark. Where Matthew presents material not found in Mark or Q, he got it from M. In the same way, stories and sayings unique to Luke must have been borrowed from L. And for all we know, Mark, M, and L, like Q, may be compilations of earlier oral or written sources. But Walter Schmidtholz demonstrates to my satisfaction that all the uniquely Lucan parables are either drawn from general Hellenistic Judaism or composed by Luke himself to serve his special interests in persecution, prayer, possessions, etc. Schmidtholz argues that all the uniquely Matthean parables are his own creations.
It's not conversational. It's like he's like speed reading a script. He needs to slow down, and it's like a little too wordy also. It's hard. It's a little hard to follow like the points and the arguments he's making.
That if Luke and Matthew were really drawing on...
Yeah, this type of delivery makes people switch off, yeah.
of oral tradition, it seems remarkable that we should find no overlaps between them, that is, no non-verbatim parallels. But in his Gospel's preface, doesn't Luke refer to numerous predecessors? Yes, but I think Luke is trying to do what Bart is trying to do, to provide a possibly fictive paper trail back to Jesus. The fabricators of Islamic hadith, ostensible traditions of what the Prophet Muhammad said and did, always supplied an attestation chain, or isnad, for their fabrications. I heard this from Abdul al-Hazred, who heard it from Raz al-Ghul, who heard it from Abu Bakr, who heard it from the Prophet, peace be upon him. Luke is supplying an isnad. It is part and parcel of Luke's apologetic motif of eyewitness apostolic guarantors. There's a fine point in the apologetical exploitation of source criticism that we shouldn't skip over. Q, for instance, is a helpful...
we are listening. Hold on. Guys, I'm all criticizing. We got this at 1.5. Why did anybody not tell me that? He's at 1.5. That's why it's so fast. My bad, Price. It's probably so slow. We need it at 1.5.
Others cut the pie in other ways. Q, M, and L are theoretical, purely hypothetical, not known but lost documents like the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Bart also appeals to the Gospels of Thomas and Peter, and the so-called Egerton Gospel is independent witnesses to a recent and therefore historical Jesus, but many think these texts are heavily dependent on the canonical Gospels. Something that is itself a matter of intense debate can hardly be taken for granted as a building block for one's case. Subtitle, isn't this so clever, Risky Patristics. Papias was a bishop of Hierapolis in Asia Minor. Around 125, he wrote a work now lost except for several quotations by church fathers called The Exposition of the Oracles of Our Lord. It is very difficult to grant any credibility to a man who says he heard from the hearers of the holy apostles that Judas Iscariot had swollen up to the size of a parade balloon, unable to squeeze between two street corners, and urinated live maggots before he exploded. I don't mean to...
You see, my opening statements in debates on Christianity or Jesus mythicism would be so different than this. I would do it I have done it in such a different way. And I feel like even in just 10 minutes, I cover way more effective and clear and concise and straight to the point. The very best arguments, like, is clear and concise at the very beginning. That's what I think is more effective for debates.
Suggest that Bart is willing to...
It's like he's trying to write like an award-winning paper or something. That's what I get the feeling of.
Such nonsense, he doesn't.
Or like somebody that's like really into him and his writings, like they would like this, but not like an audience where you're trying to like compete against somebody else.
Explicitly rejects it. But the astonishing thing is that even in the face of this, he still accepts Papias as an important source. Again, to appeal to such a worthless source only underlines the paucity of the evidence. Did Papias get this tradition from associates of the apostles? If he says he did, then his claim to apostolic hobnobbing must be considered just as fanciful.
See, apostolic hobnobbing fanciful, like... He's just like rambling and trying to like be cute and funny and stuff. Clever. He's trying to like be clever, do clever.
Yeah. Paul's Jesus. What do the Pauline epistles tell us about Jesus? Bart says, quote, he never mentions Pontius Pilate.
Too much fluff.
But he may have had no need to do so. His readers knew full well what he was talking about. If they were already fully informed about Jesus, then there was no need for Paul to remind them that Jesus walked on water, raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, and was executed in Jerusalem. End of quote, but suppose his readers were familiar with at least the first two stories. Bart believes such stories are pure legends. If the Corinthians or the Thessalonians knew about these miracles, that doesn't mean they knew anything about a historical Jesus. What is at issue in the question of Paul not mentioning Pilate or the Sanhedrin as culprits in Jesus' death? Paul never describes the crucifixion as a mundane execution at the hands of earthly governing authorities, though of course nothing he says rules out that possibility. What he does say is that Jesus was done to death by the rulers or archons of this aion, the principalities and powers. Mythicists infer that the author of these epistles was writing at a time when Christians believed in a celestial man of light who had not appeared on the earth to teach and heal and die on a Roman cross, but who had been ambushed and slain by the demonic entity entities inhabiting the lower heavens. As we read in various surviving Gnostic texts, this death would have occurred in the primordial past. His slayers harvested the sparks of his light body and used them to seed the inert mud pie creations of the demiurge, imparting life and motion to them, beginning with Adam. Thus, the death of the primal light man turned out to be a life-giving sacrifice, just like that of the Vedic Purusha. Eventually, the revealer was sent forth from the divine world of light to regather the divine photons, redeeming them from the imprisonment of this world of solid flesh. The Gnostics naturally considered themselves to be the elite light bearers who had heeded the call of the revealer, manifest among men in the form of Gnostic apostles. At some point, some of these Gnostics historicized their salvation myth, envisioning the sacrificial death of the man of light as taking place down here in the sublunar world. At first, the coming of this Christ was understood as what we would call a hologram, an illusion of physical presence among mortal men and women. The enlightened could discern the purely spiritual character of the Savior, while those mired in mundane consciousness took him for a man of flesh. Eventually, this unenlightened, genuinely incarnational Christology became normative. The Pauline literature would represent a pre-historicized version of Gnostic Christian belief, or a faction which retained the earlier version when others had adopted a historicized Christology. This is the model that makes most sense to me. Right, a thing like this, as Bart says, this is not probative. You can't prove this unless you got time.
Also, too, another critique is like he's using so much so many terms and big words. Like maybe Bart Ehrman. This is Bart Ehrman can understand and keep up with this, but like the crowd of Christians or the crowd of people that are new to this information, this is all just like coming at them way too fast, I think. You guys getting that vibe too? Like, I know what he's saying, but I also been studying this stuff for years.
Machine. It's a question of what paradigm makes most sense of the evidence to one, and this is what makes the most sense to me. Paul, quote, Bart says, refers on several occasions to Jesus' teachings, end quote. What? Where? Well, of course, Bart is referring to two passages from 1 Corinthians. Quote, to the married I give charge, not I but the Lord, that the wife should not separate from her husband, and that the husband should not divorce his wife. 1 Corinthians 7, 10 through 11. Are we so sure Paul is quoting a saying of the historical Jesus and not passing on a command vouchsafed to him by the ascended Christ? I think the latter is more likely. We cannot be sure Paul does not mean he has a historical Jesus quote on hand, but if this notion of Paul passing on private oracles is even a plausible suggestion, then you can't just assert that he is quoting the historical Jesus. The same applies to 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26, where Paul quotes the words of institution of the Eucharist. Conservative apologists contend that the words, I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, imply that Paul is repeating an account given him by his apostolic predecessors, an account of Jesus' Last Supper. The received, delivered language is familiar from rabbinic tradition, but especially in Paul, it can just as easily mean the opposite, as in Galatians 1. I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel that was preached by me is not according to men, for I did not receive it from men, nor was I taught it, but it came through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Note the similarity to I received from the Lord in 1 Corinthians 11:23. Why doesn't it denote in 1 Corinthians what it most certainly does in Galatians? We may also compare the situation of the Gospels and the Pauline epistles to that of the Synoptics versus John. As Morris Casey notes, it is obvious that the unique and powerful sayings and discourses attributed to Jesus in John's Gospel cannot be authentic sayings of the historical Jesus, because no such materials, the I am discourses and so on, appear in the Synoptics. Is it reasonable to argue that Jesus really said such things, but that none of it had reached the ears of the synoptists? Of course not. As all critical scholars admit, these sayings did not exist, hence were not circulating in the period when Q, Mark, and Matthew, throw in M and L if you want, were being written. They arose within the sectarian community of the beloved disciple later on. Shouldn't we understand the absence of Jesus' sayings and stories from the Pauline literature in the same way? It simply did not yet exist, or we should be seeing some of it in the epistles. Subtitle, Mythicist Mischief. Is it possible that any texts in the Pauline epistles that imply belief in a recent historical Jesus might be secondary scribal insertions? Bart does not suffer interpolation theories gladly. Quote, it is only the mythicists who have a vested interest in claiming that Paul did not know of a historical Jesus, who insist that these passages were not originally in Paul's writings. One always needs to consider the source. end quote. The trouble is that these suggestions were not made by mythicists. William O. Walker, Jr. discusses a whole raft of proposed early interpolations, not one of them the proposal of a mythicist. Each suggestion comes with its own reasoning. A.D. Howell Smith, in his Jesus Not a Myth, showed how Galatians 1:18 through 19 might have been interpolated. He says, unless the allusion is interpolated, Paul had an interview with a brother of Jesus who was one of the 3 pillars of the church in Jerusalem, Galatians 1:19. There is a critical case of some slight cogency against the authenticity of Galatians 1:18 and 19, which was absent from Marcion's Apostolicon, his collection of Pauline epistles. The word again in Galatians 2:1, which presupposes the earlier passage, seems to have been interpolated as it is absent from Irenaeus' full and accurate citation of this section of the Epistle to the Galatians in his treatise Against Heretics. J.C. O'Neill, in The Recovery of Paul's Letter to the Galatians, contended that Galatians 1:4 through 5 originally comprised a short creedal affirmation in poetic form added by a scribe. Jean Magne, if I'm saying it right, in From Christianity to Gnosis and From Gnosis to Christianity, argues that 1 Corinthians 11:23 through 26 was interpolated in order to authorize certain innovations in the Eucharistic service. I have made a case that 1 Corinthians 15:3 through 11 was interpolated into its present context, but then I don't count since I'm...
Dude, I'm ready to skip it. It's just...
Little did I suspect that others, not mythicists, had beat me to the punch. Winsome Monroe suspects 1 Corinthians 15:1 through 11 of belonging to a subsequent post-Pauline stratum of the epistle, while J.C. O'Neill also deems it most probable that 1 Corinthians 15:1 through 11 is a later creedal summary.
Ehrman's even tired of listening.
R. Joseph Hoffman speaks of the interpolative character of 1 Corinthians 15:5 through 8.
He stopped taking notes. Okay, there he goes.
Oops, 30 seconds. Okay, well, so much for the scandal of the cross. Let me just say that I don't think they had to invent a crucified Messiah, because I believe that the righteous Davidic king is a scaled-down version of what was originally in ancient Israel, the myth of the sacred king, who was God's representative on earth, could even be called God, and went through annually the...
True Siggy sent $5.
Thank you, Siggy.
I agree with your take on atheism and Alex O'Connor. Atheists are largely complicit by omission. As you said, they offer no real opposition, and thus allow all this madness to happen.
Yeah. Yep. Very soft. Thank you, Siggy. Glad to hear you're on the same page.
The myth of how Yahweh became king of the gods by killing the chaos dragons, being devoured, and emerging alive again, and then taking the throne of the gods and creating the world. So this, Margaret Barker shows this kind of stuff is still around at the time of the Book of Revelation, and it wasn't Orthodox Deuteronomic Judaism, but probably provided the categories for early Christian Christology.
All of that just did not need to be in the debate. Like, you've got a short time for your opening statement, people's attention, and you're going to say that? How does that help? Oh, and he's done. And that's it. See, no good closing either. There's no way that was 30 minutes. Was that 30 minutes? No closing? He didn't sum it up, wrap it up, put a bow on it. Say, this is why. He should have been closing, summarize like the 5 best points that he made of why there's clearly midrash fulfilling myth, no extra biblical sources. Should have listed them. He rushed it so hard. Yeah, he should have slowed down, covered less stuff, and just hit the good parts.
So we've shown that I am going to hold people to the clock. You have 10 minutes for a break, and we'll come back for questions. If you come in after the 10-minute mark, please try and take your seat quietly, because we're starting.
Dude, he's like out of breath and like sweating and stuff. With those legs, oh my gosh, look at those legs. Can he even like stand up for 10 minutes and do an opening statement? His shoes, look how swollen his feet are. That is not good. I wonder if he's lost weight. Has he been this big for like the last 10 years? It was like a marathon for him. Looks like he's got diabetes or something.
The nature of debates so that they are much more conversational, and rather than joint press.
That's why he rushed it so fast. He sped read through his thing that he pre-wrote so he could sit back down. He could have just asked to do it sitting down. Yeah, maybe he was rushing because he couldn't stand up that long. Maybe he's just like in excruciating pain with those cankles.
And I'm happy for the cross-examination period. It's the part where I get the most out of it. It's the part where I think the audience might get the most out of it, because you get to watch people think, and that is always edifying.
Or not
In the
think.
10 minutes, it will start with Dr. Ehrman first. He has 10 minutes to ask questions of Dr. Price. And please remember that the question time belongs to the person asking the questions. So please don't think it's rude if whoever the questioner is happens to interrupt to redirect if they think something's gone astray. Or
This is so weak. They're not even going to go back and forth. Like, hey, Bart, you made this point. Now it should be the time to address each other's opening statements. They're going right to crowd questions. What the hell? What a crap debate setup.
Clarify a point. This is their time to use, and we'll do 10 minutes beginning now with Dr. Ehrman.
Okay, thank you. Is this on?
So no opportunity to hear his opening statement and respond to his opening statement? Really?
Well, thank you, Bob, for very, very interesting and informative talk. I appreciate it very much. So I've got, I have 163 questions. I think what I'm going to do is
Okay, all right. So they do get to ask each other questions. I'm kvetching for no reason.
just kind of start where you started. So I was a little surprised when you said that ancient people like Trypho and Celsus held to something like a mythicist view. Isn't it true that both Trypho and Celsus explicitly talk about Jesus' birth and his baptism and his death by crucifixion in order to show that these were natural events and not supernatural events?
Yeah.
So what? So what? First of all, we only know that they wrote those things because they were being responded to and quoted in the Church Fathers apologists. Number one. Oh, I wonder what Price is going to say here too. Also, just because they're debunking other parts of Christianity, showing that it's ridiculous, doesn't mean that they also weren't skeptical that the guy ever existed at all.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I noticed that, and it seemed to me that the only way to make sense out of this is that they're going on to say, well, this is your story. Let's see if it has any plausibility.
Yeah.
So that he's elaborating.
Internal critique. They're like, I don't even got to say it's all fake. I can just do an internal critique and show how it's retarded and makes no sense and isn't true and is silly. That's what they're doing.
It's incompetent as a
Okay,
myth.
well, I don't read it that way at all. All of these texts are readily available, and they're very interesting texts. I encourage everybody to read them. The Dialogue with Trypho by Justin, and the Against Celsus that you'll find in Origin, where he quotes Celsus's views, and it's pretty clear that Celsus believes that Jesus was born and that he was baptized and he was tempted, that he was crucified. I mean, he's quite explicit about it. I noticed when you're talking about my view, in that little segment, you had first quoted Trypho that the Christ you have created for yourself. Then later you quoted me as saying something about traditions that from a few years before Jesus was supposedly crucified, or before the supposed crucifixion. It seems like you could take me to say, well, Jesus wasn't really crucified. He was only, and I think you're reading Trypho that way, rather than, these guys, they spend their treatises showing that the Christian interpretation of the events is wrong, but they never deny that Jesus was born or baptized or crucified.
Yeah, good point, Amalek. Trypho likely didn't even exist. He was a fake figure for this polemic. Trypho the Jew as his mythical counterpart.
Well, let me get to the next question. Several times you expressed your surprise that contemporary authors did not mention Jesus if he was really a significant figure. So these same contemporary authors, how often do they mention the most powerful religious figure in Jesus' day, Caiaphas? Or how often do they mention the most significant Jew of the first century, Josephus?
Well, I believe somewhere in the Mishnah they refer to the serpents of the house of Annas, which I take it to mean that they knew about this whole bunch of people. I always like to point that out because I have to defend the Gospels with the idea that if you say that they say any Jews were involved in the death of Jesus, it's anti-Semitism. And I point out, well, no, Jews, like the ones that eventually put the priesthood to the sword, they knew about him, mentioned him, didn't like him, thought they were quislings, which they were. But did he... Well, what I'm saying is if Jesus were merely on that level, or like the exorcist that Josephus mentions, why would they come in? Why would Jesus come in for mention?
Yeah, I understand that. But I mean, it's a common mythicist argument that Jesus is never mentioned in any Greek or Roman source of the first century. And yeah, I mean, I understand the argument, but I mean, either is Caiaphas, who is the most significant religious leader of the time, and either is Josephus, who's the best documented figure of the first century. He's never mentioned in any of these sources.
But these
so
guys,
why would Jesus be?
Well, because he's a miracle working
No,
Superman.
I don't think he was a miracle worker.
That's what I mean by saying the Daily Planet have reported on Clark Kent. He's an insignificant.
The fact that they don't mention a Jew from Palestine is not surprising.
That's right.
Yeah, but it doesn't show he didn't exist.
No, well, the idea is I fully agree.
I mean, you don't think it's an argument that Caiaphas?
Yeah, we agree with that. He's strawmanning what the argument is. We don't say we know he didn't exist because nobody wrote about him. But it is just a fact that nobody wrote about him. We're not going to not mention that. When you guys claim for sure he existed, and we're saying Josephus wrote about other messianic figures that didn't have anywhere near the success that Jesus ended up having. And because it's important to point out there's no extra biblical mentions of Jesus in the first century because Christians claim there are. They claim that he's written about outside the Bible.
They wouldn't have been taken advantage of as a miracle-working demigod.
But I don't think he was a miracle-working.
But then it's no surprise that it indeed is no surprise we don't have mentions of
They don't mention any first-century Jew.
But if Jesus was that insignificant, is that a sufficient cause?
He's
for
not
Christianity?
that insignificant. He's like every other Jew of the first century. They don't mention them. Okay, let's move on because we only have 10 minutes. But so actually, my next thing is about this point where you were saying that that when you strip away the.
Also, did Price even bring that up in his opening statement? It's like he just made a bunch of arguments, and you're going to bring up like an argument that he didn't make? You pointed out that Josephus, I mean, it's a little weird that nobody wrote about Jesus until not even Tacitus, if it's Crestus and not Tacitus. Not until 100 years after he supposedly lived did anybody write about him outside the Bible.
Yeah, that's an interesting. When you strip away the myth from these stories, there's like nothing left. It's kind of banal and uninteresting. And so why would you even tell the story? It's an interesting point.
It is.
The examples you picked. Let me see. I can't even read my own. You picked a couple examples. For example, the feeding of the 5,000. I think was one of your examples. But I mean, I don't think there was a feeding of the 5,000. So I don't see how this is an argument. I mean,
well, what is it that got beefed up into these miracle stories?
I don't think anything got beefed up into the miracle. I don't think that what you do is you read the miracle stories and then you strip away a miracle and you say, that's what happened. That's not my method. I've never used that method.
Cameos of the whole idea that Jesus was just Joe Rabbi.
No, I don't think it was Joe Rabbi. Look, I wrote an entire book.
So he admits the whole story of the feeding of the 5,000 is completely myth. There's you can't remove away the 5,000 fish and Jesus was really at a picnic or something. The historical Jesus probably really had a picnic. He just didn't obviously multiply the bread and fish and turn the water to wine.
Can say about the historical Jesus. So, I don't know what it is, 250 pages long. So it's not as if there's nothing you can say. There's a lot you can say without conceding a single miracle. But the way you get there is not by reading the miracle of the 5,000 and saying that they just had a picnic. I mean, as you know, Hey,
that's what I just said. He just said exactly what I said. See?
As well as I do. And in the 19th century, there were historians like Heinrich Paulus who did just that. That's what they did. And Albert Schweitzer showed you can't do it that way. And today, nobody does it that way. So I think you're beating a straw man because that's not how any of us proceeds. How are we supposed to know how much time we have, by the way?
Hold on. Maybe that example is a bad example, but I'm sure you can find other examples that better fit that argument. Feeding of the 5,000 was a bad one, though. Like, let's see.
Okay.
Ehrman says that you remove away the magic. Okay, there's not. Okay, here's an example. So they'll say in Jesus's passion and crucifixion that there was 3 hours of darkness and an earthquake and the dead walked around. You can't just like remove those magical things but a guy still really was crucified. If all of the crucifixion story is based on a midrash on Isaiah 53 and Psalms 22 and connecting in all of these other prophecies stuff, you can't remove all that and say, oh, well, there must have been. Why would they add, if some dude just got crucified, why would they go to the trouble to add all of that other stuff? It's just another Jew that was crucified. That argument, that story fits better than 5,000.
So, I mean, as you know, the way people go about it is not simply by stripping miraculous things out of the Gospels. What they do is they evaluate every story to see whether there's anything historical in it. For example, the baptism. You know, is there anything historical in there or not?
What's your argument that there's a historical crucifixion then? That's not what you're doing. Just because his argument that there must have been a historical figure that was crucified is that they would not invent a crucified Messiah. But we demonstrated, yes, they would. Why not? Why not? Not every Jew thought of the Messiah the same way. You can clearly see in the scriptures they found one way or another midrashically a bunch of verses talking about a suffering Messiah. Dude, Chad, are you not even hearing any of my arguments? You're just talking about Price's pants the whole time? You're just like tune me out and you're just like having your own little peanut gallery conversation about Price's belt and pants. That's all I'm seeing. Hope you guys are having a lot of fun making fun of some old fat guy with a bunch of superhero characters.
By taking out the miracle bits, the way you were saying it happens with Josephus. So, okay, look, I do need to get on. Josephus, yes, okay, I mentioned Josephus. Let me talk about Josephus for a second. No, I don't want to talk about Josephus. I decided not to ask that one. How much time do I have? 3 minutes. Okay.
Take the L. Just take the Josephus L then, bro. The earliest mention of Jesus is Christians lying. Take the L.
Right. One of our big disagreements is about Paul's understanding of the death of Jesus. When Paul says that the archons of this Ion killed him, you take this to mean that there are these celestial powers up in the heavenly places, and you take it in a Gnostic sense. Is that correct? Yes. So the question is, what does Paul mean by the term archon, and what does he mean by the term Ion? So Paul uses these terms in other places. What does he mean when he says archon?
Daywalker Jones.
References to earthly rulers, not even...
Adam needs to settle this. At what height are pants supposed to be worn? Hips or waist?
Not above your belly button like his. Hips or waist? I don't know the difference. What is the difference? Which is higher, hips or waist? I'll tell you one thing. I hate pants, jeans that are, they say sit below waist. Those sucks. They might as well just call those like butt crack jeans. Sits below waist. Who wants to wear pants that are like, you know, with your butt crack hanging out? Sits below your waist, so when you want to pull them up so high enough that your butt crack doesn't fall out, you're giving yourself a wedgie? No, sits at waist, not sits below waist. Does that answer the question? I think only gays wear sits below the waist. You guys know what I'm talking about?
It's Romans 13:3. It's quite clear he's talking about earthly rulers. I don't think.
I know it's usually taken that way, but I think the tribute rendered unto the rulers.
Here's what he says. He says, "Be subject to every governing authority, for there is no authority except from God. Therefore, he who resists authority resists what God."
Well, Hollow or Bust sent $10 on Rumble. At No More News, pretty please make sure the checkbox for push notifications is checked when you go live. I have been late for about the last 6 streams, ESP the late ones. Thank you.
I don't even know there is a box for push notifications. Are you sure that there even is one of those?
It is supposed to sit at your hips. High waist or at your hips more or less. We wore pants like that through all of history. Modern pants are a scam. Sorry Adam, but this is far more important.
Yeah, I guess the pants question is more important than the Jesus question, apparently. This is important, huh? All right, I think I wear them at my hips then. Glad we settled that.
For the archons are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of him who is in authority? He's talking about governing authorities.
Well, on the one hand, if he does mean that, we have the oddity of him saying, it's only the wicked God punishes. You mean like Jesus? Would a guy say that?
He says they would not have crucified him if they knew who he was. That doesn't make sense. If the Romans knew who he was, They wouldn't have crucified him and fulfilled the Jewish God's prophetic plans, would he? Now, would he? That would lead to the conquering of the Roman Empire. That's the part that you left out there, Bart. He says they would not have crucified them if they knew who he was, the archons of this age. And there's another verse where it says he's the rulers of this age, and there's the ruler of the air. And they're basically the same figure that they're talking about.
If he thought Jesus had been unjustly, judicially murdered by the authorities?
Yes, he apparently did say that, and so did 1 Peter. I mean, this is a common
right,
trope.
same
It's a
problem.
common trope in early Christianity. After the New Testament period, you have all sorts of authors who say that Jesus was killed by the authorities, and you should obey the authorities. I mean, it may not make sense to us, but the reason they're saying this is because they don't want to cause any more problems. They don't want Christians to be doing things against the law. And the idea that the ions are referring to Gnostic myths. Okay, so I just encourage everybody to read up about Gnosticism. So when do you date the Gnostic myths?
I think they go way back and evolved from Judaism, though with some cross-pollination from other sources, as you see in the Nag Hammadi text. There's already Zoroastrian and Platonic elements, but I think Margaret Barker is right in that it comes from Judaism.
Well, it may come from Judaism, but Gnostic scholars today, of course, when you and I were back in graduate school, back in the Pleistocene age, people did.
No, Bart. You learn from a bunch of Christians, and they have to say that the Gospels are the original and the Gnostics came later as a Gnostic heresy. You can't have it the other way around, because then these Christianity wouldn't be real. That's your problem, and that's why we can't rely on your guys' dating for those things.
Was a pre-Christian set of religions. But Gnosticism today is normally understood to be a second-century phenomenon, that it didn't predate Paul. And so nobody talks about Gnosticism as a predecessor of Paul, because these texts that we have post-date Paul. The Nag Hammadi library is all second-century stuff. So I don't think you can use second-century texts.
Just because you say it's second century doesn't mean that traditions don't go back earlier than that.
50s.
How do you know there weren't hypothetical traditions and oral teachings that go back further, Bart Ehrman, like your own arguments?
So my time is up. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, I tend to go with Boltmann and Reitzenstein and others. Their arguments persuade me that it was, and Schmidtals, that these things were pre-Christian and non-Christian.
In the 1950s, that's what they thought, but they don't.
We have now started. Dr. Price's 10 minutes.
Yes,
and I
okay.
think my
You've
mic
used
might
3 of
be
your
on,
minutes.
But please, it's your first 10 minutes
I'm
for
just
questions.
kidding. Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I would like to ask one question. I'm pretty sure it's did Jesus? Good God, snap out of it, Price. How Jesus became God. I think that's the book where you say that you changed your mind on whether the.
Hold on. So you have your opening statement, and then you have the back and forth questions. He doesn't even have the first question he wants to ask. No, dude, not even looking at his paper.
Of Joseph of Arimathea and the women disciples visiting the empty tomb, that you suspect now that is not historical. Am I misremembering that? Or if I'm not, how did you make the transition?
So whenever I debate these Christian apologists, which is what I'm usually doing with my life, as you know, they always argue that there are 2 facts that everybody agrees on about the resurrection.
Check this out, guys. Look at this. So Ehrman's argument that he was making about the archons of this age, right? 1 Corinthians 2. We declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. That's the verse that he says, Paul says the Romans killed Jesus. And then right after it says, it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no human mind has conceived. So a midrash citing no eye has seen or ear has heard, and that they didn't know. If the rulers of this age understood God's plan, they wouldn't have crucified. That makes way more sense with Satan and his demons than the Romans. Where's my other one? Oh, here it is.
About the resurrection of Jesus, that the tomb was empty and Jesus appeared to people. And they say you have to explain these two facts, and if you can't explain these two facts, then you have to agree that Jesus was raised from the dead. So this is, you've heard this a trillion times, so have I. So I actually do agree that some of the followers of Jesus believe that he appeared to them. I absolutely think that that's true. I think they had some kind of visions, but I don't think Jesus appeared to them. I don't think Jesus rose from the dead. I think people have visions of deceased loved ones. It happens sometimes, and some of them did. So I think that's true. When I was writing that book, I came to think.
So they made it up because they were expecting a resurrection of the dead, and because of the scripture, they believed a narrative that there would be an appearance of a resurrected figure, a resurrected of the dead.
Something that before that I thought was crazy, which is I came to think there really was no empty tomb. I don't think the story about Joseph of Arimathea is a historical account. And the reason I came to that is this. I decided to look up every reference that I could find in every Greek and Latin author of antiquity who mentions crucifixion, and to see what they say about crucifixion. And one of the striking things is that we have no literary descriptions of crucifixion. In other words, we don't have any text that tells us this is how they did it. You know, they nailed them, or they tied them, or they did this. This is how they set the cross upright. There's no descriptions of this, because everybody...
All right, check this out, guys. This is in the book too, but I want to show you guys this also, just to show how wrong Ehrman is. So Ephesians 2:2, we talked about the rulers of the age, rulers of this age, that's who crucified Jesus. Look at the rulers here. When you followed the ways of this world, and the ruler of the kingdom of the air. The ruler, archon of the kingdom of the air. The ruler of the kingdom of the air is the ruler of this age. They believe that Satan was ruling over earth. So the ruler of the air, does that sound like the archon of the kingdom of the air and the archon of the ruler of this age are the same person, and it's Satan, not talking about the Romans? Response, Bart Ehrman?
Everybody knew how it happened, I suppose, but they don't describe it. One thing that does get described a lot, though, is, or a relative amount, is that Romans left the bodies on the cross. They did not take them down when they died. Part of the punishment of crucifixion was that the body was left to decompose and to be subject to the scavenging animals. So you have references to this in our sources. And so I came to think, you know, if that was part of the punishment, that you'd be humiliated even after death and would not be allowed a decent burial, if that was part of the point of crucifixion in Roman circles, then would they have made an exception in the case of Jesus? And, you know, it's not like they would say, well, he's the Son of God, so let's give him a decent burial. You know, so I came to think that probably they did not give him a decent burial, and so that the story of Joseph of Arimathea was probably a later legend that was invented precisely so Christians could say there was an empty tomb. But I don't think there was an empty tomb. Yeah, because I don't think... So my guess is what they did is they crucified him. They probably left him on the cross, and then probably disposed of the remains, probably just chucked him in a common grave.
Oh, so they would make up the whole... So he says the Gospels are proof Jesus existed, but they're going to make up details such as the empty tomb. So they'll make up the empty tomb, but they won't invent the figure whole cloth. They'll make up every crazy thing about Jesus in the Bible, but they won't make up that he existed, apparently. That's just too far. Because they would never invent a crucified Messiah, but they would. They actually would. And you're just wrong about that.
Be my guess.
What do you think of Burton Mack's argument in a couple of his books that scholars should give up the idea of the resurrection, whatever it was, as the big bang that started Christianity? And he said, and perhaps there were all sorts of Christian and Jesus communities, some of whom found it in their interest to use resurrection imagery, others didn't, and that we've been naive in assuming that, oh yeah, it all started with that explosion of those visions, whatever they were.
Yeah, well, you know, Burton Mack was obviously a very brilliant scholar. Still may be. I don't know if he's still active or alive even. I don't know either, yeah. So...
his tomb was found empty.
His tomb was empty, yeah, right, yeah. He actually wasn't that good. He was good, he wasn't that good. I used to be open to that idea, but I don't really buy it anymore. So in my book, How Jesus Became God, I actually argue that it was the resurrection that really mattered. That if you have, suppose you do have this group of people up in Galilee who really appreciate things like the Sermon on the Mount or something, and they're this like alternative group. I don't see how you get Christianity out of that. Basically, you've got a Jewish teacher who's saying some interesting things, but without a resurrection. So I think without the resurrection, you don't have what would start Christianity.
I think that's correct also, but the way I imagine it is that those types of Christianity, like what Max says, is the Q community.
But there wasn't, for Jews to have a vision or a revelation of some cosmic figure doesn't mean that there has to be a historical figure. You get that, right? Just like people claim angels come and visit them. People claim that they have dreams and they speak to Jesus, right? Or people have dreams and they speak with mythical characters from movies or from TV shows and stuff as the character. Some Jews claiming they had a mystical experience where they had a vision of Jesus doesn't mean that they knew a historical Jesus in the real world.
Jocelyn 8 sent $10 on Rumble.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Says that if Celts start a religion that says we're chosen and destined to inherit Earth, it's racial supremacist and evil. But when Jews do it, it's ethnic particularism and rolling on the floor laughing emoji.
That's so good. That's a good way of tricking AI and showing the double standard. Yeah, if it was a white person story, but just give the Jewish story, but just don't say it's from the Bible and it's from white people, and they'll be like, yes, it's supremacy. That's funny. Good one. You should post that on Twitter, Jocelyn.
What you've just said, they perished. Because there was no, like Jewish Christianity did later on, they just had no more market share. They were too Jewish for Gentiles and vice versa. But that it's still possible that there were, and that's all. It's speculation any way you cut it. But if there's reason enough to think that Q implies a Zitzim Laban of a non-death and resurrection Christology, they could have existed, because any way you cut it, Constantine and the gang pretty much squashed all the other early Christianities. I wonder if that happened before without even any intervention.
Yeah, it's just I don't think you would have any reason for people to be following Jesus in particular. He's not saying anything that's completely unlike what anyone else is saying. So why? So if he got crucified, it's not somebody you want to follow, probably.
Well, that's my Clark Kent analogy. Like, would you get Christianity out of a guy that was just a faith healer? Like, is Oral Roberts likely to give rise to a religion? I hope not.
No, maybe not. But there are, as you know, there are people who do give rise to a religion who are not. To the rest of us, are not particularly interesting people. So, yeah.
That's it.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll start another 10-minute segment with Dr. Ehrman asking questions. Thank you.
Okay, good. So, So, Bob, in one of the things I like about your books on all this is that you talk about the importance of establishing probabilities. And you do that in a number of sophisticated ways. One of your books, you talk about the principle of analogy and things. We don't need to get in but the idea of probabilities. So as you know full well, there are hundreds of references to things that Jesus said and did in our sources. So the Gospels are filled with stories about Jesus' teachings and his deeds, things that relate to a man from Galilee who did these things. We don't have any stories in our sources about the activities of a God Joshua who lived in outer space. And so I'm just wondering.
No, wrong. Paul says he saw Jesus in the third heaven, number one. Hebrews talks about Jesus ascending and descending like amongst the angels, and that he's in the heavenly temple that's not built by human hands. It's a copy of the one like on earth. So you're wrong already about that. Ascension of Isaiah has the Jesus figure being seen when Isaiah is caught up into the heavens also. So you're definitely wrong.
Of the two.
Well, you do have theophanies in the Old Testament of the angel of Yahweh, and I kind of like, and I know this is all speculative, you can't really get beyond that. Margaret Barker says she thinks that the reason Jesus, the old joke that, well, how could Jesus be God? Was he praying to himself in the Garden of Gethsemane? Well, Barker says, well, you see, it looks as if you have the survival of the pre-Deuteronomic Israelite polytheism, just like you had Farrakhan carrying on the original version of the Nation of Islam. You had Latin Mass Catholics who rejected the official judgment of Vatican II. Well, these myths and beliefs don't die out, and she said that Jesus, she thinks, is supposed to be Jehovah, and that the name Yahashua, Yahweh saves, that he was understood to be a theophany of Yahweh, and he was praying to his father, El Elyon, the Most High God, whom some still distinguish between, and that the distinction survives in Philo with the two cherubims standing for the different natures of God, almost like
so I mean, my point isn't so much about what's in the Old Testament, but or Philo, but the sources that talk about Jesus don't talk about. I mean, we don't have stories about somebody who's up in the outer space.
What
doing,
you do
doing
if he's
things.
Jehovah in a theophany?
In the New Testament?
Well, that's the idea I take seriously that Barker
All right.
says.
Well, let me pursue it in a different way. We know of thousands of people who were crucified by Romans.
And wait a second, too, dude. You agree that Paul believed Jesus was like a pre-existent angel. So where do angels live? In the heavens? If Jesus was made like at the beginning of time, where was he hanging out the whole time until 2,000 years ago in Judea? If not in the heavens.
And certainly many hundreds of Jews in Palestine.
To say that Paul, it's so crazy. He admits that Paul thought Jesus was a pre-existent angel, but he's like, Paul doesn't say that he's doing anything in heaven. Well, where was he before the New Testament story about him happens then? Checkmate, got you, Bart, got you again, sorry.
Who were crucified by Romans. We don't have any accounts of Jews being crucified in outer space by demons. So why is it more probable that that's what Jesus was originally thought to be? Why is that more probable than just thinking there was a Jesus who was crucified by Romans like so many thousands of other people?
Well, who are you talking?
Ascension of Isaiah. Ascension of Isaiah also has Jesus in the heaven with Satan and his demons. That's why. And like we said, because Paul doesn't say Pilate and the Romans or Herod killed Jesus, he says the archons of this age. And then elsewhere he calls it the archons of the air, meaning in the firmament, in the heavenly space realm. That's why Carrier's book is called Jesus in Outer Space. They believed all types of cosmic battles and drama were going on with angels and demons going up there in first century Jewish cosmology. Bart should know this.
About this miracle-working Superman who seems in many ways to be a classic Hercules.
No, I'm not talking about him. I'm not talking
also, if it was originally believed and there were scriptures placing Jesus in heaven, by the time that the proto-Orthodox historicizing factions of Christianity came along, they would have excised those parts. They would have taken those parts out because they wanted everybody to believe that Jesus actually existed on earth by the time after the Gospels. So they would have tampered with it and removed those parts, harmonized it to a historicist Jesus.
I'm talking about the historical Jesus.
Well, if there we go back to my Clark Kent thing. I don't know why even such a crucified figure would have made a splash. It's certainly not implausible that people got crucified, that's for sure.
Well, I have no trouble believing that Clark Kent existed, but I don't think Superman did.
That's right. Would there be issues of Superman comics if it was only Clark Kent? I just don't think, like you say, would have...
Exactly, that's what the chat just said. If Superman was based on a real historical figure named Clark Kent, are you saying like myth makers found this real reporter at the Daily Planet and decided to turn him into Superman with legend? No, of course not. Speak of the devil, yeah.
The guy who was not thought to be raised from the dead have been an adequate cause for Christianity? I think
yeah,
no, and that's what we're doing.
He was thought to be raised from the dead. That's the whole point.
But you're saying the idea of the crucifixion in the heavens is the problem.
I'm saying that we know that Romans crucified thousands of people, including hundreds of Jews, and so there's nothing at all improbable that Jesus was a Jew who was crucified.
Dude, in the Platonic idea, just like they have a heavenly temple and an earthly temple, there's going to be, also, this is so stupid, they wouldn't have invented a crucified Messiah in heaven if they weren't aware of crucifixions on earth. If there was no crucifixions on earth and they weren't aware of it, nobody would know what they were talking about if you said crucified.
That's right, except that we have a lot of Gnostic texts of redeemers who were somehow identified with the man of light, and they were done to death. And I do think that's pre-Christian stuff. I just because there's a more chic, in-style opinion of Gnosticism,
We don't have any.
buy
We
it.
don't have any of these Gnostic texts that predate Christianity.
Well, we don't have any copies of the New Testament.
I'm not
that
talking
are
about
all that
copies.
old.
I'm not talking about copies. I'm saying the texts themselves the texts we have are written in the 4th century. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the texts were composed in the 2nd century.
So were the Gospels, in my reckoning.
Well, but Paul was before that, and Paul doesn't talk about people out in outer space crucified.
Well, he might, depending on how you take the Colossians and
He doesn't talk about people on earth crucifying him either, Bart. He never places Jesus on earth, actually. And he never knew a historical Jesus. The best you got is brother of the Lord, which brother is a spiritual brother, open shut. Not an apostle, just a regular baptized Christian named James.
passages.
Well, okay, but I mean, virtually everybody dates the Gospel of Mark to the year 70.
I think they're wrong. I always like to say, the consensus of scholars was that Jesus should be crucified. The consensus means nothing to me because you never know why there's a consensus. You can't take a nose count and determine, 20 million Mustang owners can't be wrong.
It's not as if every scholar is maintaining this as a fundamentalist Christian. I mean, you have agnostics and
No, just
and
9 out of 10.
also, I mean, basically, there are reasons for dating Mark to around the year 70. So, okay, we can't get into that. So let me ask another question. How much
What are the reasons that it has to be right after the temple was destroyed in 70? Why not 75? Why not after Josephus in the 90s? What is the reason that Mark couldn't have been written after Josephus in 90 AD, Ehrman? This is a Christian thing to try to date it as early as they possibly can.
time do I have?
And I don't even know why it matters.
On to probability things, another probability thing. So I mentioned earlier that there are events in the Gospels that historians tend to think contain a historical kernel. And one of them, for example, is the baptism. As you know, I mean, a lot of people think that Jesus really was baptized by John the Baptist. And so I was rereading your book on the Christ myth theory and its problems.
They're just pretending to be different so people don't actually investigate the actual history of their scriptures.
Right. Yeah, that's the controlled opposition aspect of it too. Exactly. Thank you.
And you go through the Gospels to try to show that the events in the Gospels, in fact, probably are not historical, not referring to a historical figure. And so on the baptism, your view is that the baptism of Jesus, where he is baptized and the heavens split open, the dove descends upon him, he hears a voice from heaven. Your view is that this is not based on anything that happened, that it's derived from the Zoroastrian traditions about Zoroaster, who is the son of a Vedic priest. He immerses himself in a river. And when he comes up, the archangel Vohumana appears to him, and to bear him tidings from the one god Ahura Mazda, after which the evil one Ahriman tempts him to abandon this call. And so I find this a little puzzling. Why is it more probable that this account is based on a Zoroastrian text that has to do with Vedic priests and Vohumana and Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, instead of being based on something of some person being baptized by John the Baptist? We know that there was a John the Baptist. Josephus talks about him. We know that he was baptizing Jews. Jesus was a Jew living at the time. So there's nothing implausible about Jesus being baptized by John, but it seems to be implausible to me that Mark is being influenced by Zoroastrian texts.
There's nothing implausible about that. Judaism, as it existed among the Pharisees, was heavily borrowed from Zoroastrianism.
Mark was not Jewish.
What, Mark is not?
Mark is not Jewish.
Well, if he certainly is basing it on what he understands to be
He
Judaism.
shows no evidence of knowing anything about Zoroastrianism.
Well, it's all over first century Judaism.
He's not a Jew.
Mark wasn't. I agree, but was he not entitled to use the Old Testament either? Because
no, he did use the Old Testament. That's my point. He uses things like the Old Testament, but he doesn't use Zoroastrian sacred
Yeah, but that
texts.
was built into Judaism at the time. In fact, T.W. Manson argued that Pharisee originally meant Parsi because the Sadducees said, you guys have accepted all these beliefs from our Persian overlords. You're not real Jews, you're Parsis.
1 minute. Okay, I've just got 1 minute. So when you don't think that Jesus existed, I mean, then I'm sure you think that Jesus' mother, Mary, didn't exist. And so I'm just wondering about everyone else. I mean, did Mary Magdalene exist? Did Mary of Bethany exist? Did Judas Iscariot exist? Did the Apostle Peter exist? Did James and John, the son of Zebedee, exist? Or are all of these people made up?
They're either made up or had different significances, which, I mean, it's no surprise. We hear nothing outside of these 2nd and 3rd century apocryphal acts about the apostles.
Hold on, does he think Mary is real? Come on, dude. There's no way he thinks Mary's real. I know he thinks Judas Iscariot is real, which shows how unserious he is. You think it's a coincidence that Judah rejected Jesus just like Judah rejected Joseph?
Peter, who's just a Dr. Watson character,
No,
like
that's true, but
Ananda.
in these sources, we don't hear anything about any first century Jews. So it doesn't mean they didn't exist. It means they don't talk about them. So,
well, if these characters are bit players in something that you have reason to think is fictitious, and that's the case I make with examining all these items, then there's no particular reason to think that there was a Peter, especially since he appears.
Well, no, Peter does it. I mean, Paul knows Peter. Paul tells it. Okay.
I think Peter existed.
All right, so we're going to begin the final of the 4.
That's the other thing, too, that makes Robert Price at risk. He's making it easier on Ehrman because, like, that whole Vedas thing, Mark's coming up with this story of the baptism from the Vedas. Like, he kind of goes out on a limb and speculates a whole lot and has a lot of, like, theories that aren't, like, you know, completely concrete. Like, that leaves you vulnerable to attacks from Bart in this debate.
That thought or whatever else comes to you. And when it's over, we'll start taking questions from...
Like, Price isn't just a mythicist, he has like a lot of unorthodox views also.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy to go with audience questions.
I hope I haven't lost my mind. But anyway, after this 10-minute section, then the audience will line up to take questions there. And while you're lining up, I'll exercise moderator privilege and ask a question or something. But we'll have the final 10-minute question period from Dr. Price now.
Well, I would just like to clarify again that I don't think I admit you cannot prove any of this. It's just a question of what heuristic model makes the most sense to you of the various data. And it's, of course, self-evident that different people look at it differently. So I'm simply arguing, as I always say in the books, this is what seems to me the most likely view, but it's all speculation. In the beginning of one of my books, I say if somebody complains that this is speculation, let me congratulate him on his grasp of the obvious. We cannot know this stuff, and a historian is always, like Collingwood said, assembling a kind of a gestalt to impose on the evidence to see if it fits the vision of the past he has sort of conjured from looking at the evidence. It's the hermeneutical circle kind of thing that Bultmann and Heidegger talk about, but it's exactly what Bultmann says about the New Testament. You approach it with questions, and you find that the data does or does not address them, and so you revise your questions if they don't. That's why, like, among people that do believe there was a historical Jesus, that's about where it stops. Who or what was he? Was he an early feminist? Was he a vegetarian? Was he a socialist? Was he a community organizer? Was he a Hasidic magician?
A zealot?
Was he a liberal Pharisee? Did he teach that he was the son of Dame Wisdom? I mean,
was he an Aryan? Was he an Aryan anti-Semite?
Was he a revolutionist? I think it's a particularly good case to be.
Was he a Rasta?
If there was a historical Jesus,
maybe
that's him, in my opinion. The SGF.
I like to picture my Jesus as an Aryan, vegetarian, noticer, anti-Semite.
Up with what seems to them
blonde hair and blue eyes, and ruddy skin.
Like there's some sort of orthodoxy to be imposed. I don't think it's desirable that everybody come to agreement about this. And in fact, I always say, well, actually about atheism, but the same is true here. It is of no interest to me whether any individual converts to mythicism as if, I'm accepting the no Jesus as my personal savior. I could not care less if you believe in God or not, unless you're a jihadi or something. It's just none of my business. Why should I care? But I happen to be interested in this topic, no doubt for biographical reasons.
So he doesn't care if rabbis think they're chosen by God and want to rule and enslave the goyim. That's no problem. Only the jihadis, though. If the jihadis can spread Islam, then it's a problem. He promoted Noahide laws with Tovia Singer. That's how weak this guy is. He's like, oh, that Adam Green, he thinks he thinks Jesus is a myth and the Jews made him up and the Messiah is meant to conquer the Goyim. Oh, I don't want anything to do with that. That's crazy. All right, Dad.
And so naturally, I've never been able to shake the question. But historians don't dogmatize if they know what they're doing. It's just a question of exploring alternative possible paradigms. I make the case. I try to explain what I think. In fact, I'm working on a book now called Bart Ehrman Interpreted, and I ran this by Bart before I started it and explained the rationale in it, because I know a lot of people read both of our books and so forth, and so I figured it might do such readers a service to explain what I think Bart is saying and where and why and how I disagree. I'm not trying to refute him, but I'm trying to clarify.
All right, dude. Ankle biting much? No, I'm just kidding.
Farther than that, because you cannot prove it.
Jesus was like an emo. I like Robert Pattinson Jesus as Jesus. That's my favorite.
A letter in Egypt where some traveling businessman wrote home to his wife, and we do have such letters, and said, oh, I happen to hear the wise man Jesus, and he's an impressive man. Suppose we...
Yeah, I just thought of something too I should have mentioned earlier. When we bring up the point that nobody outside the Bible mentioned Jesus, that's not necessarily an argument we make against like atheist people arguing over historicity of Jesus. That's an argument we make against Christians that think that he was God. You can't be God and nobody wrote about him. You can't be the Jesus of the Bible, superhero Jesus, and do all the miracles, and then nobody outside the Bible wrote about him. That's an argument we use against Christians, not against Bart Ehrman on Jesus not existing. Cleared that up for you. Thank you, Bart.
About the age of it, that would be enough to drive the stake through the heart of mythicism right there. And it may happen. You know, this is not a dogma. And so I've just been trying to contrast our views. I don't think Bart's view is not viable. I hope nobody takes me to be saying that. It's just an exchange of different opinions and reasons we hold them.
No, but he says you're not viable. I don't say it's completely impossible that there could have been some colonel figure that they exaggerated things on. I don't say that that's absolutely impossible. Not like they try to say it's absolutely impossible that he didn't exist. So we're the one being more intellectually honest.
You have any other questions, Strim? All right. All right.
Well, okay.
I just think it's way more likely he did.
He's actually ceding you a moment of his remaining time if you had a point.
I just want to agree that that you have to figure out. I agree with the thing about a gestalt, that you've got to figure out a paradigm and plug your data into the paradigm and see which paradigm makes the best sense. And I'd just like to say that for me, as a historian of the ancient world, the best paradigm for understanding somebody like the Jesus talked about in our early Christian sources, the best paradigms are not provided through Zoroastrianism or through Gnosticism, because I don't think that Zoroastrianism was widely known. The gospel writers show no evidence of knowing Gnosticism, Zoroastrianism. And Gnosticism, we simply don't have the early materials that we...
Yeah, dude, everybody knows the memes of Zoroastrianism played a big impact on Judaism, and that trickled down into Christianity, Bart. Come on. Come on, dude. Come on, bro.
The paradigm, because we don't have evidence that it even existed yet. The Gnostic writers themselves...
And I've never in my life made an argument related to Zoroastrianism and Jesus mythicism. So, again, what are we talking about? What kind of weeds are we getting in? Getting off in the weeds.
Influenced by the Christian tradition. And so the idea that they provide the paradigm for Paul doesn't make sense, because Paul was writing in the 50s, and we don't have evidence of these people until the 2nd century. So that's all.
Are we good? All right, so thank you. We have time remaining for audience questions.
Getting in the weeds with Rasta Jesus.
If you have a question for both of them, that's fine. If you have a question for one or the other, let's not try to dogpile entirely on one of the two. And while people are lining up, I'd like to ask a similar question to each of you. There's no denying that the mythicist position isn't considered serious scholarship generally by serious scholars. And so my question for Dr. Price is, why do you think that's the case? And for Dr. Ehrman, what would it take to make you think this is deserving of serious scholarship?
Michel Foucault spoke about the archive or archive of accepted knowledge and assumptions in every generation, whereby certain things can be considered, others can't, and like we say ad nauseum these days, it's a matter of can you think outside the box. And I think that when the mainstream, say, of this Society of Biblical Literature implicitly becomes a kind of magisterium, if you want to play the professional game, you're welcome to do it, only within certain parameters. I don't think I would be allowed, if I tried, to make a statement of this. Even at the Jesus Seminar, I gave a similar presentation on the Pauline epistles, and even these supposed radicals said, well, now let's get back to sanity. Oh, thanks. It's just like certain things are unthinkable, I think, and I don't care how many people think this or that. I want to hear the arguments, but I think that's kind of the way it is. You have to play the game that people are playing, and I don't blame them, because the kind of interaction they want to have is there's certain rules to a game. Like, for instance, the Paul thing, here it's difficult for me to get into that because I go along with the Dutch radicals of the 19th century that Paul wrote none of the epistles attributed to him. Well, that puts such a gulf between us, and I think the Gospels are written in the 2nd century. It's hard to bridge that gap or to find common ground, so it's certainly understandable why people say, let's draw these rules up for the game or we can't play it. I understand that, and I'm not playing by those rules. Doesn't make me right or wrong.
And Dr. Ehrman, on that question, what do you think it would take to make this viable in serious scholarship?
Right. So, I mean, you're right. It's not a question that's debated among scholars. Most scholars simply don't even think it's worth debating because of the overwhelming evidence. And so, I think...
What overwhelming evidence? A lot of these scholars that don't debate it don't even read Carrier's or the peer-reviewed work from Lataster and Carrier. Their cop-out is, well, they don't think it's serious, so they don't even read it and they don't debate it. So it's not debated. Case closed. That's not the way it works, dude.
I'll tell you what I think needs to happen. If people really want to keep pursuing the mythicist issue, I personally think it's a mistake to pursue the issue. I think that there might be better avenues to take for people interested in these things. But if you desperately want to pursue the mythicist issue, the only way it's ever going to be taken seriously in the academy is by people establishing their credentials in the academy and showing that they have
Well, funny, because they won't let you establish your credentials if you were a mythicist. If you want us to take you seriously, you have to have credentials in the academy. How do you do that? By not being a mythicist? Okay, well, circular much? Wow, dude, his arguments are so bad. How does he make... Carrier has a quote that, like, every paragraph or every page, there's, like, multiple of these, like, wait, what? What did you say? For anybody to take mythicism seriously, somebody has to have credibility with us. Well, how do you do that? Not be a mythicist. Okay, great.
They publish books on topics, not on mythicism, but just publish books on topics with Oxford University Press or Harvard University Press or Yale University Press.
Okay, so his argument is, in order to have credibility with them, you have to talk about anything but mythicism. That's crazy. Yeah, that's like Parisia, that's like Jay Dyer. You have to believe in my God to argue against him. Yeah, you have to be approved by the pro-Christian institutions. How did he become the Reddit Pope? That's funny. Yeah, he's the high priest of historical studies or biblical studies. That's amazing. And he doesn't even say, like, evidence. First of all, Carrier has a PhD and all the credentials. He's got peer-reviewed papers. His book is peer-reviewed. So why don't you guys address it? Oh, you don't? Okay. You still try to say consensus. Oh, but my consensus. Oh, you have credibility if you're in the academy and have published papers. Dude, you've got Christians that believe in miracles that have credibility in your SBL that publish peer-reviewed papers. You've got scholars that are Christians and believe in and write papers for the resurrection, and that's considered credible for you people in the SBL? Yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that cope.
Universities as professors in some cognate field, ancient history, classics, early Judaism, early Christianity, and on the basis of having some authority, argue the position. Because at present, it's just looked at as a view that outliers have who are just trying.
Okay, Carrier did all that, and you still tried to credential him.
Just think religion is nonsense, and so they're coming up with these arguments to show that religion is nonsense. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the view people have, but that is how it's perceived. And and people think that the argument itself is just nonsense. I mean, people just think it's a laughable argument. And so for it not to be a laughable
all the Christians. So being a Christian scholars are laughing at it. Oh yeah, well we're laughing at them. I'm laughing at you that you, as an adult, were going to school to be a preacher. I'm laughing at you. How stupid the things you are, you believe. We don't debate you, we laugh at you. That's the argument. Where are all the debates of Carrier getting destroyed since it's so much evidence and so laughable? Where are all you guys lining up to take down Carrier and stop the madness of his mythicism? Where is that happening? Oh, it doesn't. That's what I thought.
argument. I think it has to be advanced by people who are recognized by the academic world as serious academicians.
Okay, thanks. First question.
I'm Frank Zindler from American Atheist Press.
Frank Zindler!
Both amusing and sobering.
Wow, Frank Zindler, that's who wrote this. Boom. Can you guys see me right now? That's who wrote this, Frank Zindler. Ehrman's face is pissed because he wrote this. Dude, this book, Bart Ehrman and the Quest of the Historical Jesus of Nazareth by Frank Zindler and Robert Price. So that's why Ehrman has such a pissed look on his face, and that's why Price is smirking.
To realize that if the Docetists had won the wars of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we wouldn't be having this debate tonight, would we? We'd be debating something much more significant, like was there a historical tooth fairy? My question, actually I have two, but Matt told me that I can only ask one, and then I've got to recycle. Then I've got to go to the back of the line, so I shall try to do that. But my first question, Bart, in your Did Jesus Exist? You criticized books written by Bob and by me and various other scholars. And in response to your criticisms, we composed this 600-page Bart Ehrman and the Quest of the Historical Jesus, which we are selling at the back table.
Mogged.
Replied to all of your points in your book, as well as all of the points you've made tonight in great detail. And as you know, I reprinted our email correspondence that we conducted for about 2.5 years.
As you know, I published all of the emails we ever had together, where you ignored all the evidence and kept saying the same dumb things over and over again.
Existence. I have had the impression that you have never read this book to see what we had to say. And I was listening very carefully tonight in your comments, for example, on Nazareth and things like that, to see whether there was any clue that you had, in fact, read this book. And I couldn't hear any evidence that you had ever read this book. And so I guess my question is this then. Have you ever read this book?
No, they won't even, all of these scholars, they say, we don't take you seriously, I'm not even going to read it, we all agree. That's the argument they give.
Or if not,
he's seething.
Thank you. So first, let me say, first of all, if the Docetists had won, the Docetists actually did not deny that there was a historical Jesus. So we still could be having this argument. The Docetists thought that there was a person, Jesus. They simply thought that he wasn't a flesh and blood human being, but they didn't deny that he did the things that are said about him in the Gospels.
He was like a phantom.
I read the book. I've read it twice.
Ooh. Whammy.
Responded to it because I disagree with everything in it. And if I responded to the book, I would have to write an 800-page book. And then you would...
Oh, you're wrong about so many things. What are you wrong about? Oh, there's just so much, I can't even say one. That's what he's pulling one of those right now. So you're not, okay, address the best argument then, dude. This is such a cop-out. Oh, it's so wrong, and I can't even address any of it.
1,500-page book. And then I'd have to write a 3,200-page book. And frankly, I'm just doing other things with my life.
All right, next question.
See? Too busy to address any of the arguments. You heard it there. He claims he read it too, but I've seen Carrier demonstrate so many times that it's clear he hasn't read Carrier's work and doesn't actually know the arguments. He doesn't understand the arguments. He's demonstrated that. He's not competent in the other side of the argument.
Mostly for you, Bart. The vast majority of scholars just accept Jesus being real. Mythicism has been kind of...
Can you step up to the mic? I'm having a hard time hearing you, and I don't know if anybody...
The vast majority of scholars have accepted that Jesus is real. Mythicism...
Yeah, I didn't like it, so I won't respond to it. It's like he's a toddler.
Has been pretty much ignored, at least for a critical evaluation of books and other research. Do you think mythicism has value, adds to the conversation, or do you think it is a distraction of whether or not... adds value to the conversation of whether or not Jesus was real, or is it a distraction of whether or not Jesus was God?
Yeah, I can't debunk that Jesus is real. I'm simply too busy believing that he was real. Yeah, this guy sounds very fruity.
Or not. And if Jesus wasn't real, do you think that really matters?
Okay, I mean,
yeah,
completely...
So funny, Money Music. He's like, yeah, I read books. We're supposed to believe that he read it twice. He read it once. I disagree with all of it. I'm not going to respond to anything, and then reads it again. You read it twice to know that you disagree with it, and you're not going to respond to any of the arguments. All right, yeah, that makes sense.
Honest, I don't think it's a credible conversation. I don't think that it's contributing anything. I think, and it may be that I'm just reading my own agenda into what's going on with the mythicist movement, but my sense is, and I know Bob disagrees with this, so he may want to say something about this because he does talk about this in his book. He disagrees with my sense, which is, my sense is that mythicism is a way of showing the very deeply rooted problems in Christianity, and that if your Jesus didn't exist, then you really have no basis for your faith.
True.
I myself am an agnostic. I identify as both as an agnostic and as an atheist. I completely identify with the humanist agenda. I don't hate Christians, and I don't think they're foolish. And I don't think that what they're doing is nonsense. I don't think that.
See what I mean? Why not? Why not? It's not foolish. Not foolish to believe falsehoods. Not foolish to believe forgeries and lies. See, he won't even say it's foolish. He won't even say it's... He's so weak. That's radical skeptic atheist. Meanwhile, loves Christianity.
But I do think that if you want to promote a humanist agenda, the best way to do that, and the best way to promote conversation, is not to advance a position that most people in the world either have never heard of, or when they do hear of it, they just think it's silly. I think that there are better ways.
People only think it's silly because you say all the time that it's silly. And people don't know about it because you're not engaging in debate or reading the books or you guys are trying to gatekeep the mythicists. Nobody knows about it because it's the consensus and there's so much evidence and I'm not going to respond. And people think it's silly, but they don't even pay attention, don't even know what it is. It's just like, dude, all this is cope.
To promote what I take to be the agenda lying beneath it all. But again, I know Bob doesn't think that's the agenda. So.
Well, actually, I just draw a distinction. I do get the impression that very many people excited about mythicism are using it as a kind of part of...
Yeah, funny how it's only gotten more popular in the last 9 years since Bart Ehrman said that. And it's not going away. And he hates mythicists, and he won't debate anybody on it. It's like, they're like in desperation damage control mode on this.
scorched earth approach to blow Christianity out of the water and so on. And I think that is a mistake. You have to bracket any such motives and just consider the case in its own right. Like, I think I know what's motivating fundamentalist apologists like William Lane Craig, but it really doesn't matter. I need to address what he is saying. And so I suspect an awful lot of mythicists are motivated, but I'm not that way, but I'm not a mind reader. And I always
Yeah, that's another thing Bart Ehrman says. He goes, oh, people just want to say Jesus didn't exist because you don't want Christianity to be real. He does that argument too. So like tries to ascribe motive to it. Like, so we can ascribe motive right back to him if that's how he wants to play it.
Point out that there could be a God but no historical Jesus. There could have been a historical Jesus and yet there is no God, and that these questions have to be kept separate. And if depending on how one defines the humanist agenda, I'm not so sure I'm promoting it.
Next.
Hey, great debate. This question is mostly for Dr. Ehrman. Do you utilize the Bayesian principles for the Bayesian principles?
Oh, you mean
Bayesian theorem?
Yeah.
Bayesian.
Dr. Carrier
Yes.
utilizes in his books. Do you utilize that principle, Dr. Ehrman?
No, I don't know any historian except for, I know two historians who employ the Bayesian principle.
So by him saying that he doesn't do the Bayesian principle, what he means is he doesn't do probability. That's just probability. That's weighting all of the evidence to try to come up with a probability of how likely it is that Jesus existed. That's what scholars should do. If you're going to say he probably existed, you have to demonstrate that with math, attributing it to different weighing it to different of the parts of the evidence. So by him saying that he doesn't do that, he's just like saying his probability is completely on a whim.
Most historians simply don't think you can do history that way. The two people I know who employ it are Richard Carrier and Richard Swinburne. Richard Swinburne uses the Bayesian theorem in order to demonstrate that there is an extremely high level of probability that Jesus was physically raised from the dead. Now, Swinburne is he's a bona fide scholar. He's a philosopher at Oxford University. I think that argument is flat out crazy. But it is interesting to me that the two people who employ the Bayesian theorem, one of them uses it to prove that Jesus was physically raised from the dead at a very high level of probability, and the other uses it to prove at a very high level of probability that Jesus never existed. So I don't know.
I hope you nail him on this. That's a problem. If Carrier is Carrier is the only one that is actually doing a study where he's trying to figure out what the true probability is of Jesus existing. The fact that all of you biblical scholars and Christians aren't doing that shows that you're not actually doing the true investigation, actually. And you can't claim Jesus probably existed if you can't show it the probability. Owned again. Carrier says the high end, it's 1 in 12,000 chance that Jesus existed, and conservative low end, that it's a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, I think it was. Yeah, Jesus probably existed, but you're not supposed to use probability to determine that.
I'm not a statistician myself. I've had statisticians who tell me that both people are misemploying it, but I have no way.
Wrong. See, he doesn't even know what it means. He's not good at math. None of these biblical scholars are really that smart, so they don't even understand math, how to do math and true mathematical probability.
Evaluating it, I don't have the so I don't use it myself. And
doesn't know how to do it. That's why.
Believers assert that the existence of God is a rule that's not being observed. Yet the believers also declare that they don't need to prove their God is real in the first place.
It's all faith, bro. Faith-based. You know, it's just like a feeling, a vibe. I had an experience once. I had a dream. A demon came to me.
But I do think that's an interesting irony.
Can I?
Thanks very much. Great debate.
I just want to comment. I don't have a comment on Bayesian probability because I'm too stupid to understand what it is.
Same with Bart Ehrman and everybody and all the other biblical scholars.
Next question, please.
Good evening.
Like if Carrier does a study going over all the evidence and then showing you how he determines to weigh all of the evidence with probability, and then adds it all up and gives you the probability in a way that it can actually be like fact-checked and disputed, and other people, if you want to defeat his probability, you don't just be like, oh, well, somebody told me he's not doing it right. You have to show the true way to do it. So that's so weak.
Question for both speakers. In Jesus Before the Gospels, Bart talks about how people in the ancient world and even today misremember Jesus. For example, Pontius Pilate gets more innocent throughout the Gospels, or the prosperity gospel of today versus Jesus' teachings and statements concerning giving away everything you own. Bart has said the historical Jesus did not make history, the remembered Jesus did. And in his lecture, Subjective Conscious and the Historical Jesus, Bob talks about how some of the stories, parables, teachings, and sayings of Jesus are later more modern myths. For example, the story of the woman taken in adultery, or the jock Jesus.
I don't like this question.
Christian athletes. So Bart says,
and is it midnight? Yeah. Oh my gosh, way past midnight. I got to go to bed, guys.
And Bob says, creating.
That's enough for tonight. Thank you everybody for watching. Appreciate the donos. Thanks for hanging out with me. I had no idea I was going to pause it so much. He just spews so much nonsense. It takes. I gotta counter it. Gotta respond to every little piece of bullshit he does. So you guys have a nice night. I will see you in the morning. I'm gonna have a collab with some streamer named Chad Champion tomorrow. Gonna be a fun one. It'll be a little change of pace from the usual seething streams probably. And we're gonna hang out and get to know Chad Champion a little bit. Stay tuned for the fit too with Chad Champion. It's gonna be a good one. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Feel free to clip some of this show, maybe, possibly. We need to get some clips up with the mullet maxing clips. And leave a comment below. And appreciate you all. Have a nice night and take care. Yeah, the pants question has been. We found a solution to the pants question. Exactly. All right. Night, guys.